Good afternoon and welcome to our coverage of the Budget Speech 2024 here on Parliament TV on DSTV channel 408. I am Dr. Sibulelo Mvulane. Today, the Minister of Finance, Mr. Godongwana, will deliver the budget speech to the National Assembly at 2 p.m. here at the Cape Town City Hall. The budget includes a number of related documents, as we know, which includes the fiscal framework, the Division of Revenue Bill, the Appropriations Bill, as well as related budget information. Over the next 2 hours before we cross over to the National Assembly, I will be unpacking the budget process with key role players so that we can better understand the various parts of the budget which will be delivered today. A lot goes into the country's budget, and today's speech by the Minister of Finance is only part of a process which includes planning, monitoring, and evaluating, and of course auditing. The budget is the instrument of translating policies and plans into public goods and services. Any policy or plan, as we know, without a budget attached to it is unlikely to be successfully implemented. Economic success depends not only on the ability of government to employ limited resources, but of course to derive impact from the work that it's doing. The role of Parliament in this regard cannot be overstated. Parliament's duty is to detect and prevent abuse, prevent illegal and unconstitutional budgetary conduct on the part of government, make government budgetary operations more transparent, and hold government answerable on how taxpayers' money is being spent. Do stay tuned for more after this.
Following the President's State of the Nation address on 8 February, the Minister of Finance, Mr. Godongwana, will present the budget allocation for 2024 to Parliament on Wednesday, 21 February at 2 p.m. at the Cape Town City Hall. The budget speech, among others, aims to balance economic growth and support for the vulnerable in our society despite limited resources. During the speech, Minister Godongwana will outline all the financial, economic and social commitments that the government will prioritize in its planned expenditure. Minister Godongwana will provide a detailed plan for 2024 spending, including proposals for revenue collection to help fund government's planned interventions and commitments. He will also introduce the Appropriation Bill and table the Division of Revenue Bill, which Parliament will process in the following months. The budget process is one of the critical instruments that Parliament uses to conduct oversight over the executive. Watch the budget speech live across Parliament's platforms from 2 p.m. on Wednesday, 21 February. Parliament, following up on our commitments to the people, making your future work better.
Welcome back, and thank you very much for staying with us here on Parliament TV on DSTV channel 408. February has been quite a busy month in the political calendar. The President delivered his State of the Nation address on the 8th of February. Last week, the debates on the State of the Nation address were held, and today is the budget speech. This period is made more critical as we approach the 7th general elections and our democracy turns 30 in April. The State of the Nation address lays out government's plans, and the Minister of Finance today will share how government's plan of action will be financed. He will also be updating Parliament about the progress that has been made in implementing the medium-term budget policy statement, which he delivered last year in October. as we've mentioned before, the budget speech is only one part of the budget process. The entire budget is quite a complicated process, which has many moving parts. The budget speech presents a macroeconomic context and estimates government's revenues and makes proposals about details of how the priorities will be funded and funds to be allocated to different spheres of government, departments, and of course, entities as well. Parliament interrogates the proposed allocation of funds to meet priorities identified in the State of the Nation address and must approve the national budget, which the Minister of Finance tables before it can be implemented. Here is a video explaining the budget process in more detail. Stay tuned.
Processing of the budget is one of the most important oversight functions of Parliament. The budget reflects the choices that government has to make, and it is the tool it uses to achieve its economic and development goals. In the budget, government sets out what it's going to spend and the income it collects, which it needs to finance its expenditure. The government has to balance a wide range of legitimate demands with limited resources at its disposal. Budget oversight is intended to help government move forward to realize its goals by increasing government's accountability to its citizens. The budget process occurs over a period of about 18 months. The budget of any financial year undergoes a 4-stage process. The stages are drafting, planning and formulation, the legislative process, implementation, as well as auditing and assessment. Parliament and government departments plan the budget for months in advance for the following year, implementing the current budget while continuously monitoring it for delivery and compliance with policy, and evaluating and auditing the previous year's budget. During the legislative phase of the budget, the National Assembly, the National Council of Provinces, and the provincial legislatures debate budget votes with the involvement of interest groups and civil society, the media, and the general public. This is to ensure that they reflect national priorities and accommodate outcomes and actions required by the midterm strategic framework. It is important to measure the effectiveness of public spending and the manner in which public resources are spent. The more immediate goals are to ensure that government budget priorities are consistent with the declared policy objectives and that the financial resources allocated to priority areas are spent fully and properly. However, a larger purpose of the budget process is to contribute to democracy through ensuring openness, transparency, and accountability for public resources. Parliament, following up on our commitments to the people, making your future work better.
Welcome back. You are still watching Parliament TV here on DSTV channel 408, and we're coming to you live from the Cape Town City Hall, where the Minister of Finance, Mr. Godongwana, will be delivering the budget speech to the National Assembly at 2 p.m. this afternoon. I am now joined via Zoom platform by Mr. Ravi Naidu, who is the chairperson of the economics work stream at the National Planning Commission. Mr. Naidu will be talking to us about, of course, the NDP, the report that they recently released, and that is the NDP 10-year review report, which was recently released. And of course, he's here to give us a little bit more context in relation to the budget, and of course, what we can expect with regards to the work of the NPC in going forward. Mr. Naidu, let me take this opportunity to say welcome to the platform, and thank you very much for making the time to be with us this morning.
Well, thank you very much, Sebulelo, and always a pleasure to be on the channel with you.
Fantastic. Just by way of starting our conversation, you indicate in the report that in order to reach the NDP goals, the overarching goals of the NDP, the economy was supposed to grow by at least a percentage of at least 5.4% over a 20-year period in order to reach the overarching objectives of the NDP. What does that mean in terms of time frames? If we look at where we are right now, and your projections are that we were supposed to create about 11 million jobs in 20 years based on the 20-year projections as provided by the Planning Commission. What are we looking at in terms of time, particularly when we're reflecting on the reality that the South African economy hasn't really grown in the last 10, 12, 15 years. And of course, the unemployment rate is now sitting at, we've got about just over 13 million South Africans who are unemployed, and of course who are not in employment and who are not in an institution of higher learning. Talk to us about projections in going forward, and how do we then course correct, and how do we come back to a path where we're able to, grow the economy and change the lives of ordinary South Africans for the better.
Right, thanks. So I think the first thing just to note is that when we're talking about development and the National Development Plan, it's really more about what are the principles, what's the way of thinking about development. Things in real life will never work according to a long-term plan, but what the plan does, it helps you think through how to make choices. Because remember now, Sebelelo, the issue, what separates a successful country and a country that fails is really the choices that leaders make, the choices that they have at any point in time, and you have to make a choice because things happen and you have to make choices. So what are the choices, what are the relationships in the economy that we need to be always aware of as things change, like COVID? No one anticipated COVID, but if you're following the same principles and making the right human choices from a leadership level, you can navigate the circumstances a bit better. So the National Development Plan must be understood not as a strict formula and one has to do it regardless of the circumstances, but what are the choices? So so the first principle really is that for the country to grow and do all the good things we wanted to do, including spending on social transfers and build institutions and all our social goals, the NDP is financed by economic growth. And the point you made earlier is that we haven't really had economic growth since 2012. So since the World Cup and the warm glow of the World Cup, we've been more or less getting 0% to 1% GDP growth per year. And as you know, the population grows by about 1%. So that's basically, and if everyone is feeling stressed, people are feeling stressed in terms of finances, it's really because there really hasn't been growth in the economy. And the National Development Plan, when it was done in 2012, was actually saying that we need about 5.4% a year to really do a whole set of expansive things. So that hasn't happened. And we're unlikely to get 5.4% GDP growth. But, if we did better than 1.5%, 2%, or 3%, we would obviously make a big improvement on that. And so I think the principle is just the need, and what the Minister of Finance will have to look at, and the President, is what can you do to grow the economy? So I think that becomes probably the first thing. And then looking from that would be, a key challenge we have looking at the issue of unemployment. Until 2007, South Africa was actually making inroads into unemployment. The levels of unemployment were actually falling year on year. People may have forgotten that. It's hard to believe now. But every year in the years going into 2007, the level of unemployment was being reduced. And then load shedding kicked in 2007. And then the levels of unemployment started to increase year on year. And that's because you can't really operate an economy with persistent and increasing in severity load shedding. And now we have Transnet with the port and the rail, which obviously affects exporters. So between the two of them, Transnet and Eskom, we're probably accounting for about 3% lower GDP than we should have. And what does that mean for jobs? Think about it like this, every 1% of GDP is worth about 120,000 jobs per year. So that means we're probably losing 400,000 jobs per year just because the infrastructure isn't providing the economy what it needs. So that's already starting to give a sense of what the priority should be for the government, for the Minister of Finance, and so on. And so there's a whole range of things, but there's always choices you would have to make to say, if that's the problem, what then are we going to do practically to address that? So I think that in the National Development Plan lays out a very detailed set of things. For the economy, we also talk about a economy roadmap, and we try to identify, 10 things that are very important that have to be focused on. Of course, you don't have to do all 10, but these things that can take us from where we are and even turn problems into opportunities. So, for instance, we have the problem of load shedding, which we've taken far too long to resolve. But if we were to resolve it in a way that had Africa suddenly having a very strong economic base of renewables, and that because that's part of our solution, we could become a world leader in renewables at a time the world is moving towards renewable energy. So suddenly that could become a strength, almost like a new gold mining industry. But now it's something else. So again, it's a set of choices. We have a problem with load shedding, but out of that problem, we could turn it on its head and it could become a basis for growth. And that's really how countries all around the world that have succeeded have tried to deal with their very difficult situations, but see opportunities within that. And that's where economic leadership really, plays an important role, because you then can identify those choices, and then more importantly, I suppose, is to implement the partnerships that then can capacitate those policies.
Indeed. I want us to quickly turn our focus to the issue of concentration. And of course, we know that in your report, you also speak to the prevalence, the high prevalence of concentration in the country, which is still a problem. It's an inherited problem, as indicated in your report as well, where we have about 10% of businesses in South Africa earning about 86% of the total income. Talk to us about how the NPC, the proposals that the NPC is putting forth, so that we can begin to actively address issues of concentration, especially now 30 years into our democracy.
Yeah. So, you have concentration can be caused by different things, but we are a small economy, far away from our major trading partners, and to be able to succeed in very capital-intensive or skill-intensive industries, we can't really support you can't just make money by selling to the small local population. You got to sell globally. So to get the scale to compete with the international rivals, Africa does tend towards having larger companies, because they are the only ones who will survive in the very wild environment of international trade. So there's a structural problem just in terms of the things we make and the things we sell, and it's hard to be a mining company if you're a small business. So we do tend towards sectors where there's a lot of concentration. That's number one. There's not much we can do about that part of the problem. But the part of the problem that we really want to also deal with is we want to get more people active in the economy. Because the more people are active in the economy, those small businesses, not everything in the future is going to be mining. A lot of the businesses are going to be technology businesses, the businesses that can use technology, or businesses that can make different types of cars. Sorry, I'm getting a bit of sound coming in. I'm not sure, Sebalolo, if you're saying something.
No. Go ahead, Mr. Naidu. Go ahead.
Okay, sorry. There was a bit of sound feedback. So the one point I'm making is really we as a country, we need to broaden the base of new and fresh businesses who are coming into different industries. And that really means, so let's say we are now, I was talking earlier about the renewable sector.
Right.
Now, the renewable sector should really be space for new companies to, companies you've never heard of, individuals you've never heard of, who are now playing any significant role. So when we're saying exporting, renewable technology to the world, it shouldn't be all the names you already know. It should be totally new people,
absolutely,
brand names you haven't heard, and they are our champions. So what the Planning Commission is also suggesting is, from small and medium companies, we really have to focus on how we support those. Remember, that's also where most of our jobs are supposed to come from, small and medium businesses.
Right.
The Planning Commission said 90% of jobs would come from those. As well as the other thing we're really focusing on is that there should be a focus on sectors that really face the future, because those sectors are going to be different to mining, and the old sectors. Obviously, they'll draw on the strengths of the old sectors, but we have to build the new with new people, and that's how you make for a much stronger platform. So it will then start to break down the highly concentrated nature of the economy, because of there are new players coming in. At the same time, one must look to see if there is any dominant and abusive behavior
Right.
by the larger companies. So as I say, sometimes you might just have larger companies because that's the only ones that can survive in the international trade in those sectors. But if they're large and abusive in a way that our competition law says you can be large, it's not a problem. But if you're large and abusive in terms of you are unfairly taking steps to block new entrants, then obviously that's where our competition law comes in. And then that has its own rules, but you have to be careful that we're not against large companies. We
Right.
are we are actually against anything that stops new companies becoming large.
Can we quickly talk about the issue of localization and access to finances, particularly within the context of the township economy? And we know that access to finances is a major constraint for emerging entrepreneurs who want to get into the mainstream economy. What are the proposals that the Planning Commission is putting forth to address those challenges in the short term?
Yeah. So small businesses are, in fact, it's number 4 on our plan of 10. And it's clearly important for the reason I've just mentioned about small companies becoming big and jobs
Right.
and so on. So one of the problems that we have that small companies are facing is if you want to get a loan from a bank, they'll look at how long you've been in existence, and if your revenue is, let's say, below 10 million rand, you may struggle to get a loan. And obviously that excludes a vast majority of businesses. And this is one of the
Absolutely.
reasons why the COVID guarantee scheme didn't really work in 2020, 2021. Banks really couldn't find small businesses that met their risk criteria. And the challenge is your traditional banks are also under global rules, which make it very hard for them to lend businesses that are considered high risk. But small businesses, by definition, are high risk. So a challenge really is we have, as a country, and what we propose is there must be special funding set aside, not from banks only, but from other funding. Remember, we're not a country that's short of money. We have a very big asset management and institutional savings industry. There's a lot of funding in there, and they're looking for things to invest in. So as a country, and the Minister of Finance plays an important role there with other ministers, is to create these facilities that are non-bank financed that can support small businesses with potential. So that's the
Right.
first thing. The second thing we say in terms of township economy, a township economy, I mean, it depends how you want to define it, but these would be typically businesses that are, you can understand it as businesses that are almost micro businesses, or they're doing a lot of trade and a certain degree of informality. And for them, it's not trying to get them to look and behave like a shop in the mall, in Sandton Mall, but you want them to be businesses that can still access up-to-date technology infrastructure. So they can do their trading on a cell phone. And you have those different apps where when you buy and sell, the trader, you basically transacting on the cell phone, with your credit card or whatever it is, and the trader's taking the sale on the phone. But all of that is going back to an app. That app is linked to a non-banking financial institution that can say to that trader, "Oh, I see you doing a lot of trades. You can access funding to expand your business, because now there's a lot of data on that trader's transaction history, and they can do it without all the forms of a bank. So there's ways in which we can connect our small traders to finance without them going through a traditional bank, which says, no, 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 no. We are governed by rules that don't allow that to
But
happen very
we don't
easily.
have
So
those
even now,
kind of...
you'll notice the big banks. Sorry,
Mr. Naidu,
I was just saying that even now
we don't have
no,
those systems in place at the moment, do we? Like
no,
the
we
way
don't.
things
No, we
are, the
don't.
regulatory framework that is available, basically we don't have that system in place.
No, we do. We do, but we could do more. So there is already a lot. You know, one of the surprising things is South Africa is really one of the top 3 countries in non bank finance for SMEs, in the sense that many, you'd notice there's apps like Yoko or,
Right.
and there's a number of them targeting different markets. Many of them are linked to at the back financing support, and the businesses that use those apps can also access finances. And none of those sources of finance are really banks. So it's quite a fast growing market. And South Africa, because we have a lot of technology in the country, and we have a strong financial sector, there are products coming on the market which make us again a world leader. But we need, but we need to give more money, I would say, to the programs that can use that technology, so that all traders who have customers can access a degree of finance that makes sense for the amount of trades they're doing. So if you have lots of customers and you're making 25,000 Rand a month consistently, someone can lend you money to open up another kiosk, because you already proven yourself as someone who can, reliably make 25,000 Rand a month. So how much can you afford to pay? And you can get financing, which now has all this data on, how consistent you are and all the rest. They can even, do the deductions off the app as well. So there's very smart ways to do it. So we have to look at how we enable that and how we upscale that.
Right.
And so I think there are ways to do it, and we definitely don't need a state bank to be giving money to small businesses, because it would have to do the same thing, and it would probably do it much worse than what we already have. So we really have to think about how we use the strengths we already have. And sometimes we're not even aware of the things in the country that are doing well, and so we should spend some time identifying those. Planning Commission has done that, and then that can be supported. And then the other thing on SMEs, look, obviously money is very, very important.
Absolutely.
Because if you're successful, you need money. But the second thing is there are also a lot of rules and regulations, and one of the affecting small businesses. So we have proposed that there should be an SME-focused red tape reduction law that really acts as a consistent red tape cutter, as it were.
Right.
So anything that is disadvantaged small businesses, we can identify it and try to eliminate that from the system.
Mr. Naidu, that's unfortunately where we have to leave it for now, but thank you very much for making the time this afternoon and for the insights shared.
Always a pleasure.
Fantastic. That was the chairperson of the Economy Work Stream at the National Planning Commission, Mr. Ravi Naidu. Do stay tuned for more after this.
Madam Speaker, allow me to frame our fiscal challenges as follows. Government spending exceeded revenue since the 2008 global financial crisis. These rising annual budget deficits have reached an extent where the government will have to borrow an average of 553 billion per year over the medium term. As a result of gross debt rising from 4.8 trillion in 2023-24 to 5.2 trillion in the next financial year. By 25-26, it will exceed 6 trillion mark. We now expect gross government debt to reach 77% of GDP by 25-26. This is higher than the level we forecast in February Over the next 3 years, debt service costs as a share of revenue will increase from 20.7% in 2023 to 22.1% in 2026-27. The cost or interest of this debt for the next year alone amount to around about 385.9 billion. Over the MTF, interest costs amount to about 1.3 trillion. This is more than we spent on police, education, or health. It is important, however, to point out that our debt levels and rising debt service costs are not problems in and of themselves. Our challenge is that the rise in debt service costs are crowding out important social spending, and our economy has not grown fast enough to support increasing expenditure or our current debt levels. Therefore, this policy statement sets out our strategy for avoiding a fiscal crisis and preventing the build-up of systematic risk to the economy. These decisions we have taken include spending reductions and reprioritization, while also taking concrete steps to support growth. None of these decisions are taken lightly. They are taken in the short and long-term viability of public finances in mind. And in the interest of balance and inclusive growth, Madam Speaker, inefficiencies and wastages of scarce public resources is limiting our ability to effectively support service delivery and economic growth. In this regard, the medium-term budget policy statement announces that action is being taken to review and reconfigure the structure and size of the state in line with the President's commitment in the 2023 State of the Nation Address. A joint plan to review government departments, entities, and programs over the next 3 years is being prepared. This plan will address overlapping mandates and functions, including public entities, and ensure that we create standards for more sustainable remuneration of executives that serve public entities receiving transfers from the fiscal. We also intend to leverage this plan to better direct our scarce resources to priority areas.
Welcome back. You're still watching Parliament TV here on DSTV channel 408. We're coming to you live from the Cape Town City Hall, where the Minister of Finance, Mr. Enoch Godongwana, will be delivering the budget speech to the National Assembly at 2 p.m. this afternoon. I am now joined via Zoom platform by Ms. Lebohang Pheko, who's a commissioner at the National Planning Commission. She's here to talk to us about matters relating to fiscal policy and gender transformation. Ms. Pheko, let me take this opportunity to say welcome to the platform and thank you for making the time to be with us this afternoon.
Thanks for the invitation.
Fantastic. Just by way of starting our conversation, we know that the current poverty rate and unemployment rate in South Africa, it continues to disproportionately affect women and African women in particular. Talk to us about what your views are in terms of whether government is actually effectively utilizing fiscal policy to advance gender transformation.
So fiscal policy is, in terms of our pioneering in South Africa, we pioneered gender responsive budgeting, in fact, in tandem with countries like the Philippines and Australia in the 90s. And I'm sure people who are older will remember that we used to talk about gender responsive budgeting quite a bit. And I think that was a intent, but it certainly has not translated into any discernible improvement in the life outcomes for women. So I think one of the problems is that we still have the approach that rather than centering the concerns and the circumstances of women in society and in the economy, and the structural deficits, of course, that we come up against and that we are raised through, instead we tend to use them. We tend to have this addendum approach to things. So, you know, you'll have a women's conference, a women's desk, and so on, an agenda desk. And what we really ought to be doing is to be rethinking things like how taxes are managed. So that that basic things like, for example, in many countries, and South Africa being no exception, the male preference, the male bias of, for example, married man's tax or breadwinner tax, which still assumes, of course, that women who are in the same position will not be paying as much tax, right? Will be paying more tax than their male counterparts because presumably, supposedly, they don't have any dependents, which of course is quite untrue. A second piece about fiscal budgeting is that fiscal budgeting is a very agile instrument. It speaks to budget stability. It also speaks to budget sustainability over time. So fiscal policies are really supposed to determine the way that expenditure and revenue are composed, and the benefits and costs of government spending and revenue policies, which means that in theory, the government could actually put, for example, much more expenditure into industries which employ women, for example, and protect industries where women are more prevalent, the manufacturing industry, the retail sector, and so on, and could also, practice economic affirmative action if we want to see women in more industries like the STEM industries, like science, technology, make sure that there are set asides in that regard for companies to be, I don't want to say rewarded, but to be incentivized in some way by ensuring that they are women, and not in a 50-50 way, but in a way that ensures that they have the most qualitative experience, and that they're also able to gain skills and transfer those skills. Another piece as well is that the government doesn't recognize unpaid work, and that a lot of this unpaid work, again, is done by women. So there are multiple taxes that women pay. You pay a tax in time, you pay a tax oftentimes in domestic work or in supervising domestic work. You pay the tax that it takes to then reach the marketplace, to reach the workplace. So we are triple taxed even before we have been taxed financially. So I think that, the state needs to recognize this by, for example, things like subsidized child care, subsidized education, subsidized hospital care, because what has tended to happen is that when those systems are not in place, or when those systems begin to crumble because of gender regressive social attitudes, women tend to be the ones to then step into the role because nobody else is going to fill it. The ways in which fiscal policy can be directed to begin to upend those gendered stereotypes and those gender norms, which are just basically social constructs, which can be deconstructed.
Absolutely. You spoke earlier about the tax policies as well. You make reference to that. Talk to us about the tax system as well, because of course we know that women are still not on par with men when it comes to earning their earning capability in the country. Talk to us about the tax laws in the country. What can be done to ensure that there is more equity within that space, to make sure that women are able to take more home to feed their children and to live a decent quality of life?
So the different taxes that we have, there's value-added tax, there's PAYE, the different sorts of taxes that we, there's also the tax on consumption, the tax on purchase and on consumption. We pay fuel levies, we're constantly taxed. I think we're one of the most taxed countries in the world. But where South Africa could do better would be to use these fiscal instruments to significantly reduce market income inequality, for one thing. So that regressive tax between that regressive tax difference and bias between women and men, that would also help to address the gendered wage gap as well. And this is through a progressive system and much more progressive social expenditure, such as the ones that I've also alluded to. And this also means that we need to rethink the ways in which the people who are the most taxed are often, remember that the people who are the most taxed are often the people of the lowest income. So when you look at a proportion, a person who has R1 billion in their bank account, blessed are they, versus a person who has R1,000 in their account, you will find that proportional to what the person with R1,000 is earning is giving to the state, the person with R1 billion is much better off. And because of the differential in power, status, and autonomy between women and men in terms of access to wealth, access to assets, and the acquisition of that wealth and assets, there will always be a differential between the wealthiest women and the most indigenous women, between the wealthiest men and even the wealthiest women, and between men and women in general at large. And because of the way that the tax is calculated in South Africa, it's usually referred to as kind of a marginal rate of tax. and it's supposed to imply that you should pay less tax the less income that you have. That doesn't actually happen. And there's some excellent work coming out of places like Wits University and different policy groups and SPY and others, which have found that, in fact, the people who pay the most tax are the ones who have the least amount, the least savings. And so they're actually being taxed even further on their meager earnings, meaning that the idea of creating intergenerational wealth is a fallacy. And for women in particular, it's incredibly difficult.
We know that government has also introduced this zero-rated VAT on specific goods. Is there any impact in terms of, improving women's quality of life and looking at, the type of goods that women would ordinarily, especially women who earn, who are at the bottom of the earning rung in our economy?
So, I mean, using a zero-rated supply would mean that a vendor doesn't charge VAT for the supply of goods and services, and they could potentially obtain a refund or a credit for VAT on taxable items that have been utilized in the making of these zero-rated supplies. Now, for South Africa, it's a bit more. This cuts across things like food items. It also cuts across things like paraffin, fuel, international transport services, farming inputs, certain grants, some educational services. So it's a large gamut of things, and basic foodstuffs, and I'd like to kind of hover around that, if I may. So, brown bread, rice, maize, stampo, mealie meal, vegetable oil, milk, dried beans, mealies, lentils, pilchard, the lucky star, tsarona, and so forth. What this should actually mean is that at the point of sale, that you should not be taxed beyond a certain amount for the kinds of foodstuffs that are on this list. And this would also mean that the sort of food price collusion that has taken place on basic items like bread and milk in previous years. Remember, I think a lot of the listeners will remember some of the scandals, the cartels. Market cartels, which meant that many of us had much less money in our pocket, even though we were just trying to buy basic food items. And I think that we need to be very mindful that this sort of behavior, the corporate corruption, and then is also a form of tax, because it means that ordinary people, Joan Glovo and Sibong, a lot more than they're supposed to be paying. And I think that we're thinking about an anti-poverty regime, an anti-poverty tax regime, which means that nobody should be taxed beyond being able to have a healthy meal at the end of the day. We need to, the gender normative of who does and doesn't do the household management and the household administration, that this falls upon women. And because of the number of single-headed or women-headed households in this country, again, it hampers them even more. So even though the idea of basic foodstuffs that are zero-rated is laudable, it does not always cut across basic industrial collusion, and it also doesn't deal with the basic things like choice, food autonomy, food democracy as well. And I think that there's also a separate conversation to be had about how it also corrals people who are working class or the working poor into making food choices which are non-food choices, and so forth, and that are not always the most healthy choices as well.
Right. Coming back to the budget speech, we know that the minister will be delivering the budget speech at 2 p.m. this afternoon. Talk to us about some of the key things that we can expect this budget to respond to from a gender responsive issue. We know that although government, and of course we know that it's also contained in the Constitution, women's rights are protected. But when it comes to, in fact, how government actually prioritizes money and how it allocates money, it doesn't actually translate into line departments actually prioritizing women specifically. What can we expect? And in going forward, what kind of work will the NPC be doing to ensure that we reach that point of mandatory, allocations to ensure women's quality of life is progressively changing for the better? Ms. Peku, are you there?
Yeah, unfortunately, we did not. Yes, I'm here.
Okay. You can respond
Hello.
if you heard me. Ms. Peko? I think we're struggling to get. I think she may be having some technical problems there on her side. That was, of course, Ms. Lebohang Peku, who is a commissioner at the National Planning Commission, sharing her perspectives around fiscal policy in South Africa and gender transformation, raising quite a number of pertinent issues around what government can do to ensure that it continues to advance the gender transformation agenda and, of course, improving women's quality of life. I believe Ms. Peko is back with us. Ms. Peko?
Yes, I am. Thank you. I think the network went. Thank you.
Fantastic. I'm not sure whether you heard the question that I asked.
You were asking about the gendered components.
Yes. And the allocation
and
of the budget. And of course, that is not mandatory. We know that we've got the gender responsive planning and budgeting framework that we have, but it is non-binding and it's not mandatory. I mean, if we look at specifics in terms of what line departments are planning for, and even across the three spheres of government, it is basically, it's upon them, it's incumbent upon them. If they decide not to include women in a more substantive way, they do not. What can we expect from this budget? And particularly, this is the last budget speech of the sixth dispensation, 30 years into our democracy. What can we expect going forward?
Sure. I mean, I think we should manage our expectations based on previous outings with the budget speech and the somewhat repetitive nature of the issues, which is perhaps not surprising given that many of the fundamentals will remain the same from year to year. And as you rightly say, I mean, I was just saying that, of course, the NPC unfortunately has absolutely no say in budget allocation and so forth. But I will say this, that, there have been attempts. We've already spoken about raising revenue and tax collection to increase public spending, for example, in areas where, in programs where women dominate. And that's something that we might see in the budget speech. And when I say dominate, that where we're more prevalent, for example, so more gendered or feminist targeted sort of indicators. And the other thing is how they're approved, how they're executed. One of the areas that the government has been quite active and quite vigorous is in the rolling out of grants, for example, in social spending. That regard, the child support grant and the child support grant system has been quite significant in ameliorating some poverty levels, and particularly in the way that they're managed, enabling that, for example, household starvation, especially of young children, has been significantly curbed, and that school outcomes are improving as a result of that. The other piece of that is that, unfortunately, as I already mentioned, that the care economy is not really, or the care economy, or social reproduction, as I prefer to call it, is not really spoken of, and it's not budgeted for. I mentioned that things like social infrastructure, public clinics, subsidized healthcare, subsidized childcare facilities near places of work or at places of work, for example. So those things are quite expensive for the working class, for the working poor, or for people who sustain themselves in different ways. I mean, 1,000 rands, 1,500 rands per child at Montessori, for example, is a middle class expenditure and middle class. And the other piece, of course, is that when we look at macroeconomic policy and the way that it's supposed to help us to go towards development goals, many of these development goals do have a feminist dimension to them. So this includes formalizing social reproduction, but it also means that we have to be able to think about things like the economic citizenship, I prefer to call it. I think empowerment is a very slippery term, but the economic citizenship of women, which is a much more autonomous, centered approach to it. And then another piece of this is that I'm sure there'll be something that is said about supporting the rights of persons with disabilities, many of whom are women, and the rights of young people, again, many of whom are women. Currently, there's only about 156 million rands that's been allocated to interventions that fully integrate women into the economy, and that's really quite a petty amount. And knowing that 42% of women in South Africa are living below the poverty the poverty line of 810 rands per month. And I think for people who are middle class, you just bear in mind that you go to the mall on a weekend, you have brunch with your family, and you spend 800 rand. And to think that this is what people are living on month to month. And again, we're then expecting hence this disconnect. We're then expecting to produce scientists. We're then expecting to produce all of these creative people. Who then are also then the sometimes scolds people for not having household savings. How can you save out of 800 rand? If this budget, which I think is a legacy budget, I think we should really the legacy budget is able to approach any of those issues, it will have done something quite positive. But I'm managing my expectations.
Wonderful, fantastic. Ms. Peku, that's unfortunately where we have to leave it for now, but thank you very much for making the time and for the insight shared.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Wonderful. Ms. Peku is, of course, a commissioner at the National Planning Commission, sharing her insights with regards to fiscal policy and gender transformation in South Africa. Do stay tuned for more after this.
Understand that lowering debt and the budget deficit alone is not enough. It is for this reason that our fiscal strategy in this medium-term budget policy statement prioritizes reforms aimed at strengthening gross domestic product growth. To this end, excluding interest, funding for capital projects remains the fastest growing item by economic classification. I must repeat this. To this end, excluding interest, funding for capital projects remains the fastest growing item by economic classification. Furthermore, we are introducing a new mechanism for improving the pace of delivery of capital projects. The medium-term budget policy statement also recognizes that government must respect the budget constraint to preserve sustainability of government services that are being crowded out by debt service costs. We propose a strategy of targeting spending adjustment based on policy priorities and a reconfiguration and rationalization of the state, which includes closing or merging ineffective entities and programs and enhancing complementarity of its functions. Madam Speaker, the poor revenue performance requires an adjustment to spending both in year and over the medium term.
Following the President's State of the Nation address on 8 February, the Minister of Finance, Mr. Enoch Godongwana, will present the budget allocation for 2024 to Parliament on Wednesday, 21 February at 2 p.m. at the Cape Town City Hall. The budget speech, among others, aims to balance economic growth and support for the vulnerable in our society despite limited resources. During the speech, Minister Godongwana will outline all the financial, economic and social commitments that the government will prioritize in its planned expenditure. Minister Godongwana will provide a detailed plan for 2024 spending, including proposals for revenue collection to help fund government's planned interventions and commitments. He will also introduce the appropriation bill and table the division of revenue bill, which Parliament will process in the following months. The budget process is one of the critical instruments that Parliament uses to conduct oversight over the executive. Watch the budget speech live across Parliament's platforms from 2 p.m. on Wednesday, 21 February. Parliament, following up on our commitments to the people, making your future work better.
Welcome back, and thank you very much for staying with us. In accordance with the powers given to it by the Constitution, the National Assembly establishes a range of committees with assigned powers and functions. The committees are required to report regularly on their activities and to make recommendations to the House for debate and decisions. And in large part of the Assembly's role is, of course, lawmaking, the lawmaking process which happens in committees, and much of its oversight over the executive is also done through committees, particularly the portfolio committees. The Standing Committee on Appropriations is one such important committee of the National Assembly, established in terms of Section 4(3) of the Money Bills Amendment Procedure and Related Matters Act of 2009 and the rules of the National Assembly. Here is the chairperson of the Standing Committee on Appropriations, Mr. Sfiso Buthelezi, reflecting on the role of Parliament in the budget process in the context of South Africa's 30 years of democracy. Do stay tuned.
You remember that we are having a history of 350 years of apartheid, separate development, which mainly meant that the majority of black people of this country were kept outside of the economy. And we are seeing the results of that. So when Mandela's administration came in 1994, that's the reality that we had to deal with. High levels of unemployment, right? High levels of illiteracy, a lot of people not having access to running water, no electricity, and so on and so forth, and no infrastructure mainly to the places where black people were living. So that's the reality that we had to deal with over the years. That's an economy which has been doing that to black people for about 350 years. That's very important, because sometimes there are expectations that in 30 years you must be able to deal with the damage of 350 years. It doesn't make it's not scientific approach. But having said that, we wanted to be able to see what progress are we making over the years. People can't wait for 350 years, right? So what progress have we made? So those are types of things that we had to deal with. So the budget, by and large, if you remember, we always say that the trilemma of challenges of South African economy, it's high unemployment rate, as you know, poverty. You don't need to read it in the book. You must just go out and see. If you go to our places, that poverty it's there. That's what we must deal with. Inequality, it's a very important thing, and talk about the inequality in this country. And unfortunately, inequality in this country is defined in terms of color. You know that people who don't have are mainly black women, are mainly rural people, are mainly black people in general. They don't have, right? The economy of this country is concentrated amongst a few people. Right? About 10% of the population, of this country, or more than 70% of the economy. So the ruling party, the African National Congress, when it came part, it identified that as one of the reasons that we must deal with. You know why is that important? It's known all over the world that unequal societies are the most unstable societies in the world. And if the society is unstable, it's very difficult for you to get investments coming into your country and so on. So it's very important that you also deal with the thing of economically, it's a right thing to do, but even politically, the owners of this country should see themselves also owning the wealth. So we deal with the question of unemployment. We use what you call a Gini's coefficient to define the level of inequality. That number is the highest. We are the highest, we're close to now 0.7, right? Gini's coefficient. That's one. It means there's complete inequality. So we are bad. We are the highest in the world, right? With all the resources that we are having. So that's why the ruling party said, the ANC said, no, we need to deal with this during my last time. We know unemployment is an issue, but how do you deal with unemployment? You can't have better employment rates when the economy is not growing. So our focus has been on trying to grow the economy. That's why the president came here, Parliament, and talked about the economic reconstruction and recovery plan, what we call ERRP. It's a way of trying to see how do we jumpstart the economy. So this economy, we are part of the global economy and global events, right? We've been having a lot of challenges along the way. 2007, 2008, with what we call the global economic crisis, right? Which was started by America, nobody else. And again, I always try to say, started by the private sector, the financial institutions, right? And when they cough, when America coughs, the whole world catches the cold. So we had to deal with the consequences of that. I'm just saying just during this period. And while the economy had been growing, it just challenged the economy big time. We know recently we've had a COVID. Again, we all know. People always want to pretend that COVID never existed. Now that's behind us, right? And we didn't know what exactly we're dealing with. But what we know now is that it had a big impact on the economy and what we're trying to do with the economy. The graph was busy going down, but immediately, and it happened throughout the world. As if that was not enough, then the Ukraine-Russia conflict started again affecting the level prices, oil, and so on, translating to high cost of living for our people, for all of us. So those things again impacting on what we're trying to do. Recently, I've got the crisis in the Middle East. Those things have got impact because these days, with the world, the global world, it's so intertwined. You know? We are not in an autarky. There's what we call autarkic economies, where economies used to operate in isolation. We are part of the world economy. When these things happen, they also affect us. Okay, and then with our own domestic challenges that we are dealing with, which you know, the question of electricity, it's a big problem. So Parliament, through the committees of finance, if you look at ESCOM, we were criticized that we build state-owned enterprises. But what is the alternative? If you allow ESCOM to follow, even if you say the private sector can't come in overnight and solve that problem. So we needed to make sure that we recapitalize ESCOM with what you call the ESCOM debt relief bill of 254 billion rand, right, passed by this parliament, because we know that all these things we're talking about, if ESCOM is not working, they'll just remain an illusion, right? So it was very important that we do that, because there can't be a growing economy without ESCOM, right? So we came in. It happened during this last administration. Again, Transnet, we were forced to build out Transnet. Again, the critical role that Transnet plays, the ports, the rail, and so on, couldn't ignore that. So if private sector, we agree they've got a role to play, but it's a little bit mischievous to say all the problems that we're having are going to be solved by the private sector. They've got their own problem, by the way. Stenoff, the biggest disaster, right, of our times, it's a private sector company. Tongati Hewlett, many jobs being lost in KZN and so on, and a good move by Mr. Robert Gumede to make sure that company doesn't shut down. So it's coming to make sure that you know how important Hewlett is, not just in KZN and in Durban, but in the whole country. So I'm mentioning those things to say it's mischievous to try and suggest that all the problems that we are having are going to be solved by the private sector, because they also have got their own problems.
Welcome back, and thank you very much for staying with us. Another critical committee in Parliament's processing of the budget is the Standing Committee on the Auditor General, a National Assembly committee which has been established in terms of Section 10(3) of the Public Audit Act of 2004. The committee's responsibility is to maintain oversight over the Auditor General and perform the functions and exercise the other powers as specified in the Public Audit Act of 2004. Parliament TV spoke to the chairperson of the Standing Committee on the Auditor General, Mr. Sakumzi Somio, in the lead up to today's budget speech. Let's take a look.
What we need to note in terms of our own constitution, the Office of the Auditor General forms part of Chapter 9 institutions, which are very critical to deepen democracy. And they ought to solidify accountability of the state in terms of both resource mobilization and resource use, and the value proposition around such effectiveness of use of those resources. The founding of the Office of the Auditor General took into its own context the availability of an institutional model which is going to keep that office accountable and protect that office and advance its own independence. And therefore, there was then a founding of a committee of Auditor General in Parliament. We are part of that system. So the AGSA's ability to keep track of whatever resource voted for in Parliament, each and every year the Minister of Finance tables the budget. You would know the quantum which filters through the state, including the state-owned entities. Then the AG, in taking stock of that availability of a package, would begin to take note of the levels of determined operational plans and what is carried through that, and how various departments or entities would want to spend such available resources. And they would follow through. If you could simplify it, they would follow the money, they would follow the rand, each and every cent of it. That's why each and every end of the financial year, they would require from provinces, from national departments and municipalities to provide an account of the usage of those resources as voted for by Parliament and pronounced by the Minister of Finance, as is going to be the case in this instance. When Minister Kotongwana tables his budget in terms of the revenue package and as well how the expenditure is going to follow that revenue. So the importance of the Office of the AG is to have the eyes wide open to ensure that not only to critique but to evaluate the extent of the expenditure in using those resources, the quality of such outcomes which are a result of that allocation. As a committee, we would have to scrutinize the standing of such reports, how they've been obtained, from which platforms, what sort of accounting policies used as determined by various standard setting entities, whether is the board which looks into the audit standards or from the Office of the Accountant General at Treasury. So it's very critical that the relevance of such accounting reports by the Auditor General has gone through those departments or entities it should adhere on such basis as set by the committee before the audits start. In realizing, you see, the pilotage return of such kind of material work out there, would have to as well look into the success or failure of the departments to adhere to required legal framework in their own expenditure. For example, whether you look into the envelope charged for, let's say, capital expenditure, whether that capex is somewhat showing the signs that if you spend money in a road, you can't get there again and use money to do the same job. So the quality aspect becomes very critical. More so when you look into the shrinkage of the availability of such resource. You would know it that the country has been mean in going out for borrowing and has relied mainly on the actual resource as SARS would work on our taxes from time to time. That's no longer the case. You know, there's some movements to seek to balance the expenditure with the actual revenue. Then they go and borrow. And in this day and time, borrowing needs huge financing. You would find out that as the state borrows, it must somewhat from time to time service that debt. And servicing the debt is another bigger amount of what the Minister of Finance had to provide on the budget. So all those kinds of intricacies and the detail of it need a level-headed institution which is go and look into the books as to whether they match the ultimate allocation as made by the Minister of Finance. So the Office of the Auditor General becomes so critical in terms of evaluating that ability. That's why they've come up with a strategy recently which is framed around the accountability framework, which is itself providing an accounting ecosystem which says to us as a country, each and every individual matters. So the actual eye to look into the infrastructure which is developed by various entities, those who are in our own communities must be that flex eye to look into that kind of quality, because we don't need loss, we don't need wastage, we need a qualitative delivery on the ground. So that framework allows a level of interaction between the Office of the Auditor General in the center, but looking after what has been spent by various entities and how they account from each angle and level. For example, if you're talking about local government, the expectation is that the MEC, who is responsible for local government, which is cooperative governance at the provincial level, would find a way to work together with local governments in the province and assist them in whatever form as per the constitutional requirements. The same would happen with Treasury in the same provincial setting. And the same would happen for the legislature with various committees of legislature to make the Department of Local Government accountable, and in that way you create a frame which is somewhat bonded in the ecosystem of accountability one way or the other. And you'll find out that where there's good working relationship, there is greatest improvement in such areas.
Following the President's State of the Nation address on 8 February, the Minister of Finance, Mr. Enoch Godongwana, will present the budget allocation for 2024 to Parliament on Wednesday, 21 February at 2 p.m. at the Cape Town City Hall. The budget speech, among others, aims to balance economic growth and support for the vulnerable in our society despite limited resources. During the speech, Minister Godongwana will outline all the financial, economic and social commitments that the government will prioritize in its planned expenditure. Minister Godongwana will provide a detailed plan for 2024 spending, including proposals for revenue collection to help fund government's planned interventions and commitments. He will also introduce the appropriation bill and table the division of revenue bill, which Parliament will process in the following months. The budget process is one of the critical instruments that Parliament uses to conduct oversight over the executive. Watch the budget speech live across Parliament's platforms from 2 p.m. on Wednesday, 21 February. Parliament, following up on our commitments to the people, making your future work better.
Welcome back. You're still watching Parliament's coverage of the Budget Speech 2024. The budget process is a complicated one, as we know, but it is crucial to good governance because the budget process ensures that government expenditure remains aligned to South Africa's policy goals and objectives. What is also of great importance is that ongoing monitoring and tracking by the executive, over the executive and by Parliament, of course, allows for interventions in the event of wrongful expenditure and failures in service delivery. The process holds government departments accountable for their expenditure and gives Parliament and the citizens it represents an opportunity to make their own demands and interventions. The Finance and Fiscal Commission plays an important role in the budget process, and as an impartial and independent institution, its role is important towards ensuring that our intergovernmental relations, fiscal relations rather, are based on equity, which in turn is based on sensible, reasonable, objective and quantifiable criteria. I am now joined by Dr. Patience Mbaba, who is the chairperson of the Finance and Fiscal Commission, to tell us more about the mandate of the Commission and, of course, just reflecting on the 30-year trajectory of the Commission and the work that it has done in the last 30 years. Dr. Mbaba, let me take this opportunity to say welcome to the platform and thank you for being with us this afternoon.
Thank you so much, Sibulelo, and good afternoon to all the viewers.
Wonderful. As we're reflecting on the FFC's 30-year trajectory, we know that the FFC obviously has been put in place in terms of, provisions in the Constitution. But talk to us firstly about the mandate of the FFC, just for clarity for our viewers at home. And of course, what role the FFC has played in terms of building our current and functional intergovernmental fiscal relations system.
No, thank you so much. So the FFC is a constitutional body mandated to advise government on intergovernmental fiscal relations and also on the equitable division of revenue amongst the three spheres of government. The fact that today we are having a budget speech from the minister is testament as well to the resilience of the intergovernmental fiscal relations system. What that means is that the FFC over the past 30 years has played an integral part in advising government 10 months before this budget speech happens. The FFC produces recommendations to government to inform government about how to equitably share the nationally raised revenue. Those recommendations are given to government to consider and to the Minister of Finance as well. So today, he will also table the Division of Revenue Bill, which also speaks to some of the recommendations of the FFC that he has considered. So looking back over the past 30 years, it shows then that the intergovernmental fiscal relations system has been resilient 30 years down the line. it also shows that our budgeting process has stood the test of time. It is transparent because it is predictable. We know what's going to happen, in the cycle. It's also cyclical. We have a medium-term budget policy framework where every 3 years we plan 2 years ahead.
Right.
So it's cyclical, we know. So over the 30 years, we have seen that this system has come into maturity. You will remember as well that in 1994, we inherited a very, very fragmented economy and a system of intergovernmental fiscal relations, which was actually built upon racial lines. Absolutely. And was inequitable. So the role then of the FFC in this whole sphere was to bring in that equity. And in the early days, the FFC was at the forefront of coming up with a formula to say, how do we do this equitable sharing of revenue amongst the 3 spheres of government? And there was a formula which was put forward to say, for local government, this is going to be the share of local government, provincial and national. 30 years down the line, we have come to realize as well that we must revisit that formula because through practice and experience and the realities on the ground, we've also seen that the share of local government is not as adequate as we initially thought in the early days. So that's going to be a work in progress as well for the next 30 years.
Right. So if we're talking about revisiting the formula, and of course this is based on history as well, it's based on what you have observed in terms of the contribution, and of course after you have allocated those resources, the impact obviously is in how the 3 spheres are able to spend that money. Talk to us about how then does the FFC balance between, of course we know local government, there's a lot of challenges when it comes to, capacity related challenges. How will the FFC then ensure that in as much as, you revisit the formula to ensure that that there's an increase in terms of the allocation, particularly at local government, that there is the capacity, the commensurate, the capacity to actually spend appropriately?
And I think that is the challenge that we are going to have to grapple with, because we need a local government that works. We need capacity, we need skills at local government. If we're going to allocate a larger share to local government, there must be a clear demonstration that there is capacity to handle those bigger resources.
Absolutely.
So we need now to professionalize the public service. And part of that is to make sure that there are skills within local government to be able to deliver services to our people, because local government is at the cold face of service delivery.
Absolutely.
And therefore we need the resources there, and we need the capacity, and we need the share to be larger for local government. But at the same time, we have to consider whether local government has the capacity to actually handle these larger resources. So it means that systemically, local government through SALGA and the FFC and other players, we have to put our heads together to say, how do we capacitate local government?
Absolutely.
How do we bring about more skills? What is is there criteria or requirements for anyone to become a councillor? Because if you are a councillor and at least you have a metric, you are able now to interrogate budgets, you are able to interrogate nuances that comes with your work. Whereas if you do not have maybe that requirement, it becomes a problem when you have to make decisions on behalf of the residents of your community or your ward.
Right. So if we're talking about, of course, we know that the Public Service Commission, alongside the Planning Commission and various other state institutions, are currently planning and playing a role, in terms of ensuring that they empower or they capacitate local government. How do you foresee the Finance and Fiscal Commission's role in terms of building that necessary capacity to spend?
So now, in terms of our recommendations now have gone beyond just looking at the formula, because the formula has sort of been embedded in the system. So our recommendations now look at quality, at efficiency, and spending of government. and also we look at the various sectors of government,
Right.
and we advise on that. That is part now of building state capacity.
Absolutely.
Which is what we are grappling with. A state that is efficient, a capable state that is able to deliver on government services. So now in our recommendations, we always interrogate the extent to which our government is spending efficiently and effectively the use of state resources. Let me give you an example. So government goes into the market and borrows money and allocates this money to state entities and government departments at high interest rate, at money market interest rates. But the capacity to spend this money is actually very, very limited in many instances, because these departments, they actually leave these huge amounts, this money idle in their bank accounts. And by not actually spending and returning this money back to the fiscus, they will claim that it's a saving. But in actual fact, if you do the math, it's not savings, because yes, they will gain some sort of interest on the balance in their accounts, but the difference is still high, because government, for them to have been allocated those funds, government would have still borrowed at high cost. So there is then an opportunity cost in this whole thing, because money was borrowed at high cost, money was not efficiently used, and was sent back to the state coffers without having done the necessary service delivery. So it's a matter now of empowering and ensuring that government departments actually use their resources, use the allocations that have been made to them, and not return them back, because there is a huge opportunity cost for not using those funds.
Quickly, as you conclude, Dr. Mbaba, talk to us about what you think, in your view, has been the impact of the Finance and Fiscal Commission in the last 30 years, very briefly as you conclude.
I think the biggest impact that anyone will remember every time you mention the Financial and Fiscal Commission, it's about how we were able to come up with a formula on how to equitably divide nationally raised revenue. I think that will always be the most enduring aspect of the work of the FFC. Now the FFC must go forward now to actually strengthen that formula.
Wonderful. Dr. Mbaba, that's where we'll have to leave it for now, but thank you very much for making the time and sharing, of course, those insights.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Wonderful. Dr. Patience Mbaba is the chairperson of the Finance and Fiscal Commission. We're getting closer to the budget speech by the Minister of Finance, Mr. Enoch Godongwana, which he will deliver at 2 p.m. this afternoon. Do stay tuned for more after this.
Following the President's State of the Nation address on 8 February, the Minister of Finance, Mr. Enoch Godongwana, will present the budget allocation for 2024 to Parliament on Wednesday, 21 February at 2 p.m. at the Cape Town City Hall. The budget speech, among others, aims to balance economic growth and support for the vulnerable in our society despite limited resources. During the speech, Minister Godongwana will outline all the financial, economic and social commitments that the government will prioritize in its planned expenditure. Minister Godongwana will provide a detailed plan for 2024 spending, including proposals for revenue collection to help fund government's planned interventions and commitments. He will also introduce the appropriation bill and table the Division of Revenue Bill, which Parliament will process in the following months. The budget process is one of the critical instruments that Parliament uses to conduct oversight over the executive. Watch the budget speech live across Parliament's platforms from 2 p.m. on Wednesday, 21 February. Parliament, following up on our commitments to the people, making your future work better.
Welcome back, and thank you very much for staying with us here on Parliament TV on DSTV channel 408. We are now moving on to Dr. Nthabiseng-Moleko, who is joining us via Zoom platform. Dr. Moleko is a development economist, obviously serving at the Stellenbosch University. She is also a lecturer there, as we know, and we'll be talking to her, of course, about a strategy that they've recently put out, in fact, a plan that has been put out by Dr. Moleko, which she co-authored with Professor Mark Swilling, and it is called New Wine into New Wine Skin. Let me say, Dr. Moleko, let me take this opportunity to welcome you to the platform, and thank you very much for being with us this afternoon.
Thank you so much for having me, and a very good afternoon.
Fantastic. By way of starting our conversation, talk to us firstly about this new plan that you've put out. Some say it sounds quite similar to the Economic Reconstruction and Recovery Plan, but today we just want to focus on this your Economic Reconstruction Plan. Talk to us about that. What are the key pillars?
Yes. So it's quite refreshing to talk about some of the key thrusts of what can be done. So thank you for the revisioning in terms of not just looking at the problematic areas, but what can really be done. So it has 7 key pillars. The plan is called New Wine into New Wine Skin. And the intention of the plan is to really say, what can we do to revive the economy? What are the necessary inputs to revive South Africa's economic outcomes? So it's an economic revival strategy. There's 6 areas that we all have to agree on in terms of what is the goal. And I think that this is where you need what we call the social compact. But the comprehensive approach is that, one, fundamentally, you need a comprehensive economic strategy. What does that encompass? It encompasses having at least a 6% growth. It encompasses ensuring that we are targeting full employment. What that means is that the required growth that is necessary for advancing labor absorptive growth path requires that you look at what are the sectors that will boost local productivity, agricultural productivity, exports expanding in terms of their contribution, but also manufacturing value-added sectors increasing their proportion of exports, but also increasing in terms of their contribution to GDP. It looks at reforming the value chains and the existing distribution channels. So one of the sequences we have taken from apartheid is that the inequality from the oligopolistic economic outline is that we haven't dismantled that. And so we need to look at barriers to entry to targeted sectors and targeted industries so that you enable new entrants to enter into these and also promote this shared economy for all South Africans. I think one of the fundamentals is that if you don't transform aggressively ownership patterns, who is part of the factors of production, you don't see change in terms of ownership of land, capital, and also access to finance. These are the barriers that prohibit and constrain economic growth along our consistent framework. So we see inequality patterns in South Africa, Gini coefficient, Gini index, if you look at Human Development Index and all these indices that look at general economic development, we haven't been able to shift. So you have to have a transformative agenda around that aspect. These are some of the aspects, and I think we can ponder as we go forward on the strategic pillars.
Right. Now, talk to us. You talk about patterns of ownership, and we know that the structure of the economy has not really changed much in the last 30 years of our democracy. And there are also, this is also findings from the National Planning Commission, that we still have high levels of concentration and monopolies. So what are your views? What ideas are you putting forth in terms of restructuring the economy and ensuring that, we change these patterns of ownership that you are speaking to?
First, you've got to industrialize. You've got to target the doubling of manufacturing value add as a share of GDP. You've got to move away from primary sector activities to your high value goods. So we talk about agriculture contributing large proportions in terms of employment. It captures the masses of the unemployed. Parallel to that, there has to be evidence-based industrialization strategies that we employ that have been proven to work. So we've got incentives and instruments that are being used for certain subsectors, but they're not yielding results in terms of job intensity. We're not seeing the broadening the participation of Black people, youth, Black women in the employment particularly. So you've got to rectify this, Mr. Lani. Secondly, you've got to mobilize finance if we're going to change the oligopolistic behavior that you referred to, if we're going to change the concentration of 3 or 4 companies, we call it the HHI index, when we look at how much turnover is attributed to 1 or 2, or is there more than a certain proportion of turnover from one dominant firm? And this you can only change by having new entrants that are supported with a mix of incentives, but also have access to new markets at a regional level and also at a continental level. So how do you revise that? You've got to strengthen our commitment to financing new entrants. We've got to have very directed, redeveloped incentives using IDC, which is the Industrial Development Corporation, which is, and the smaller entity, which is like the National Empowerment Fund, to locally source inputs and locally source new production from new enterprises, local firms that broaden participation. And this has to be very deliberately done. It cannot be by chance.
Right. So if we're talking about specifically localization and reviving the township economy, how have you given any thought to the Africa Free Trade Area Agreement, and how does that fit into the ideas that you're putting forth in terms of ensuring you're speaking about markets, market access, for new entrants, for new industrialists? How do you foresee that taking shape?
One of the very important aspects when we talk township economy, I think that it's a quarter of South Africans live in the townships. We see a plethora of what I call fast-moving consumer goods that if you look at the most used brands, it's our day-to-day brands, whether you're looking at shoe polish, whether you're looking at baked beans, whether you're looking at maheu, whether you're looking at retailers, franchises that we buy from day to day. I don't want to mention any specifically, but you get a sense of what I'm talking about. These
Absolutely.
are not just in the townships, but also in the rural areas. How much of the local value chains are part and parcel of distribution and participating in linkages in these value chains? I think that's number one. Fundamental, if I consume in my household income, I have, whether I get 1,000 Rand into that household, about 70%, if I'm a low income household, I use for food. The way you fundamentally change the framing and the modeling of our economy is part and parcel of what I use every day in my day-to-day. The production of food and processed foods, we should have a multiplier effect in our local economies, linking both your township economies and your rural nodes to these inputs. And so what you've got to do now is you've got to break up what are the food and also any other products that there are opportunities and economic activity opportunities that don't require significant inputs. If you look at things like chips, if you look at things like cola, if you look at things like uniforms, children polish their school shoes every day. We have soap. these are many products that can be used with very little capital intensive inputs, but you can have large scale interventions that are organized, that transform township livelihoods, rural livelihoods. Then you look at your macro, which are your bigger corporations, and we not only look at the micro level, micro, medium, and your macro, which then you look at production of funding for these products that are in the retail value chain. If you don't break and penetrate into the value chains where most people are buying, where most people spend their household income on, whether it's the clothing, whether it's the furniture products, whether it's the consumption of food, these are the things where we have to deliberately look at the post-apartheid liberalization of broadening economic participation. And I think that they remain delinked. And so the strategy in the new wine talks about industrialization. We've highlighted certain to now break down what instruments to use, what mechanisms, what current state subsidized cheap credit needs to be enhanced, and the entities that need to be financed and recapitalized, particularly in the agricultural sector, because I think these are the quick wins where we improve market access and improve linkages to retail and the agricultural sector of those who are not there currently. So you've got to have massive entry, small and large scale commercial black farmers, commercial producers, commercial industrializers, or those who are in processing of some of these stuffs that I've spoken about and products. So I think there's massive opportunity, but we're not organized as much as we need to be.
Dr. Maliko, as we look at the economic reconstruction and recovery plan, and we look at that's an existing plan, obviously put out by government, as you've also spoken on various other platforms commenting on, the efficacy of this plan. But talk to us about how do you then take all these progressive ideas that is packaged in this your document, this paper that you've put out, because obviously it is about coordinating, it is about adding value and infusing best practices and ideas that have the potential to take the country forward. How do we bring in these ideas and infuse them and build them into existing plans so that we can be able to accelerate forward as a country?
Let's build the state capacity. That's the one thing. Let's create an environment within the state where if I come up with innovative ideas, if I come up with risk-taking, if I come up with solutions as an official, I am not seen as regressive. I am not seen as someone who is taking things back, but rather someone who is taking things forward. If I get young economists, young professionals into the public sector, and they come in and they want to implement some of these strategies, the relationships between those who have been there for a long time and those who are coming in, let me tell you, if we can synergize and have a developmental approach to say, let's innovate, let's rather work away from report management and reporting on what we have planned to do against reporting, but rather innovation and impact, an adaptive approach that looks at impact every day, we would have a capacity in the state. And I think this is where the focus must be. Collaboration and having some kind of organization of the state. Now, if I can further elaborate, if we look at COVID-19, we were able to organize the state into a council. We were able to put business and all the other departments. We were able to use state data, look at the performance of each of the hotspots in the district level to see the impact and the efficacy of efforts. Now, at an economic level, we have never done something like that before. Why don't we organize all of the economic agents, institutions, whether it's finance institutions, looking at the Reserve Bank, putting together the economic cluster, whether it's DTIC, small business development, energy, all of those clusters of economic strength. Why they're not in a council where the president, together with business, the trade unions, and all of government work together towards building whatever it is that is necessary so we can see a growth that yields more than 1%, so that we can see an unemployment rate declining from currently over 45% in 6 or 7 provinces down to less than 10%. Why don't we put together a collaboration and cooperation amongst the state agencies, even at a local level and a district level, so that this institutional paralysis that we're seeing in the state is end, by data, evidence. So we use the data that Stats SA is giving us. We monitor that data monthly. We act based on the data, and then we respond and see if our efforts accordingly are sufficient for the development challenges that we have. So I think we need to look at reorganizing, collaborating, and also putting urgency more so in terms of some of these outliers and some of these key issues, actually not outliers, key issues that are critical problems of South Africa right now that we haven't been able to sufficiently deal with.
Wonderful. Dr. Muliko, that's unfortunately where we have to leave it for now, but I want to take this opportunity to thank you very much for making the time to be with us and for the high-level insights shared.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Ntabiseng Moleko is, of course, a development economist at the Stellenbosch School of Business. We are literally minutes away from the Minister of Finance's budget speech. With that said, do stay tuned for more after this.
Honored members, in the light of the difficult financial conditions faced by municipalities, addressing the ESCOM problem without dealing with the municipal non-payment and uptake of debt relief programs would have been counterproductive. The debt relief engagement arrangement for ESCOM outlined in 2023 budget noted that a large portion of outstanding municipal debt is owed to ESCOM. National government has introduced support to relieve municipalities of debt to ESCOM. Upon application by a municipality, the debt to ESCOM up to the 31st of March 2023 will be written off over a 3-year period of equal annual tranches. This is providing municipalities complies with a set of conditions. These conditions include enforcing strict credit controls, enhanced revenue collection, and up-to-date payment of current account owed to ESCOM. By October 2023, 67 applications had been submitted, totaling 56.8 billion, or 97% of total municipal debt owed to ESCOM at the end of March 2023. 28 applications have been approved. The remainder are being assessed and verified by provincial treasuries. The ultimate goal is the profound transformation of these municipalities by enabling them to build financial resilience, amplify their capacity to generate sustainable revenue, and rekindle a culture of paying for service rendered.
You're still watching Parliament TV here on DSTV channel 408, and today is, of course, Budget Day. The Minister of Finance, Mr. Enoch Godongwana, will be delivering his speech, his budget speech, to the National Assembly here at the Cape Town City Hall. Before we get there, before we cross over to the chamber, I am now joined in studio by the Director of the Parliamentary Budget Office, Dr. Dumisani Jantjies. Dr. Jantjies, thank you so much for being with us this afternoon, and thank you for making the time.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, and greetings to your viewers as well. Thanks.
Wonderful. Talk to us firstly about, we know that South Africa we're marking just about, we're 30 years into our constitutional democracy. We're a few weeks away from that, exact 30-year mark when South Africans went to go and cast their vote for the first time. But talk to us about how we have been able as a country to use fiscal policy to advance transformation.
Yes, thanks so much. I think you're right. It's 30 years down the line, and we've seen a lot of transformation in government service delivery. We've seen a lot of investment in many sectors, societal areas over the years through the use of budget. We've seen more access to education by many households, more access to water. Many households, formal dwellings have increased. I think the trajectory we've seen quite a lot of development in our economy through the use of public finance, through the use of budget. And I think it's that's a lot to look back on to say what has been achieved. There are obviously some of the structural issues that also still stuck with us, particularly when you look at issues of unemployment. It's a big issue now, which a lot has been done in trying to create spaces over the years, support sectors of the economy, support small medium enterprises. But I think the support has not led to a lot of employment created. It's largely really has to do with the structure of the economy in part, but also a lot to do with the need for a very obvious intersal policy provisions that enables that development of many sectors that would ensure that we create more jobs in a more sustainable way, particularly when you look at how our economy was pre-COVID-19, pre-democracy, where we've seen that pre-94, where we've seen that we heavily relied on exports of minerals, yet they account for a very limited percentage of our GDP. But that has changed quite a lot. We see our GDP is quite diversified, but I think there's still a lot of reliant on primary sectors, your minerals, a lot of it, and hence you see over time, in recent times, if the commodity prices goes down or get fluctuated, we get impacted quite easily because we still rely heavily on that. So there's quite need to have a very obvious industrialization that take us more to secondary sector. In a way, what I'm saying, there won't be any shortcuts. And one of the concerns that we've raised now, and this is particularly recently, we say, look, we need to take a more microeconomic reform that leads to that long-term thinking around where we can get more sustainable economic development, which prioritize secondary sectors in particular.
Dr. Jantjies, we are literally minutes away from the minister's speech, which he will be delivering at 2 o'clock this afternoon. And this will be the last speech, budget speech of the 6th dispensation. And some are referring it to this speech as a legacy speech. What are the key features of this speech? If you can talk to us about the key, the analysis that you've done, and the guidance that you've given in terms of framing what is now contained in this budget.
Sure. I think what government has already set out its objectives for this in the midterm in October last year, and I think it was in November. But I think we've got fundamentally 4 or 3 priorities that has been put out by the president from last year's State of the Nation address. Even this year, it's really a lot to look about ensuring employment creation, energy security, dealing with crime, and some of those other issues. I think for us as well, our consistent analysis has always been that we need to have a very obvious thinking around where will employment be created in the economy. And the budget has to be strongly saying that. When you look at the public employment program was introduced by the president in the recent time, presidential employment initiatives has done quite a lot of progress. We've seen a lot of progress around that. But I think with the number of unemployments that we have in our economy, we need to have clear indicative areas where this is how budget will create employment in a more explicit way, or which sectors of the economy we see as more priority to really lead to the employment. And as an issue that we've been raising a lot of times, issue around investments. We've seen a lot of investment, particularly around energy security, around rail, transportation, and those areas, but also even at the localized level, maintenance of infrastructure. Those are really key areas in our view can lead to a lot of opportunities for creating more investment or more employment within our society.
Indeed, as you conclude very briefly, we are literally going to be crossing over in a few minutes. What is the impact and the legacy of the Budget Office? Very, very briefly.
It's a thesis question, but I think the impact has been to provide very useful insight to show members what is the impact of the budget it has on the economy and society, and also within the budget itself, in a way that when the proposals come, we're able to say to members, this is likely to impact service delivery. This is how it's likely to build the economy. This is how it likes to impact the service delivery or public finance itself. That's in a very high level, showing how does the budget impact society and economy. That's very important for us.
Absolutely.
And I think something that we continue to do over time.
Fantastic. Dr. Jantjies, that's unfortunately where we have to leave it for now, but thank you so much for always gracing our platform to come and share those high-level insights.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thanks so much.
Fantastic. Dr. Jantjies is, of course, the Director of the Budget Office in Parliament. We are now crossing over live to the chamber as members are arriving, and of course, course, as we know, this will be the last speech. The Minister of Finance will be delivering his final speech of the 6th dispensation, and some are calling it a legacy speech. But of course, what we are saying is that, a lot has been done. Yes, we're not where we want to be as a country, but of course, we keep on moving forward, as we bring together thought leaders, unpacking critical issues and major complex problems. But with that said, we are crossing over to the chamber. You will begin to see the visuals now as members begin to arrive.
One, two. This one is a bit there. This one is a bit there. Madam Speaker,
now be an opportunity for silent prayer or meditation. Please be seated. Order. Order. Honorable members, take your seats, please. Honorable members, take your seats. Before we proceed with today's business, I wish to announce that the vacancies which occurred in the National Assembly due to the passing of Ms. Alice Hlebani Mthembu and Ms. Violet Siwela have been filled by the nomination of Mr. Khulani Elphias Richard Hadebe and Ms. Nuran Muller, respectively, with effective from the 16th of February 2024. The members have been made and subscribed the oath in the Speaker's office. I welcome you, honorable members, to this National Assembly. Honorable members, the Secretary will now read the first order to third orders together.
orders of the day: introduction, appropriation bill, and the tabling of the division of revenue bill. The second order, introduction, second adjustment appropriation, 2023-2024 financial year bill. The third order of the day, introduction, gold and foreign exchange contingency reserve account, deferral amendment bill.
The Honorable, the Minister of Finance.
Madam Speaker, Nosiviwe Mapisa Ngagula, His Excellency President Cyril Ramaphosa, His Excellency Deputy President Paul Mashatile, Cabinet colleagues, members of the Executive Committee for Finance, honorable members, the Governor of the South African Reserve Bank, the Commissioner of the South African Revenue Services, fellow South Africans. Madam Speaker, according to two prominent economists, Alberto Alsenia and Danny Rodrigues, they had this observation to say, and I quote, "A crude distinction between economics and politics would be that economics is concerned with expanding the pie, while politics is about distributing it." The point, Madam Speaker, is that the size and quality of the national pie is what informs and ultimately determines the realization of the political imperative of redistribution. Our mission over the past 30 years has been to restore both social and economic justice for our nation and to decisively address the inequality that was the hallmark of the system of discrimination and dispossession. The budgets we've tabled since 1994 have been about securing the goal of growing the economy so that we can do more to address the inequalities and deprivation that still scar our society and undermine the promise of democracy. So it is with a great sense of privilege and purpose that I stand before you to present the last budget of the 6th Democratic Administration. Siyabuya. Madam Speaker, I therefore table the following documents before this House. The 24 Division of Revenue Bill, the 2024 Appropriation Bill, the estimates of national expenditure, the 2024 Budget Review, the 2024 Fiscal Framework, the second Adjustment Appropriation Bill, the Budget Speech, the Gold and Foreign Exchange Contingency Reserve Account Deferral Amendment Bill. Allow me to begin, Madam Speaker, with the global outlook. Global growth is forecast to increase from 3.1% this year to 3.2% in 2025. The moderate improvement is due to growth in the United States and several large economies. There are downside risks from potential spikes in the global oil price, if the conflict in the Middle East escalates, and if growth falters in China, the country's largest trading partner. Despite improved global outlook for 2024, South Africa's near-term growth remains hamstrung by lower commodity prices and structural constraints. We estimate real GDP growth of 0.6% in 2023. This is down from 0.8% growth estimated during the medium-term budget policy statement. The revision is due to weaker than expected outcomes in the third quarter of 2023, particularly in household consumption and fixed investment. Between 2024 and 2026, growth is projected to average 1.1%. The growth outlook is supported by the expected easing of power cuts as new energy projects begin production and as lower inflation supports household consumption and credit extension. But there are also risks to the domestic outlook. These include persistent constraints in electricity supply, freight rail and ports, and higher sovereign credit risks. Our challenge, honorable members, is that the size of the pie is not growing fast enough to meet our developmental needs. As such, our fiscal strategy to support economic growth reduce risks to the economy while ensuring fiscal sustainability. Compared to a year ago, the budget deficit for 2023-24 is estimated to worsen from 4% to 4.9% of GDP. The higher budget deficit means that debt service costs in 2023-24 have been revised higher by 15.7 billion to 356 billion. Debt service costs will absorb more than 20% of revenue. To put this into perspective, spending on debt service costs is greater than the respective budgets of social protection, health, or peace and security. For this reason, honorable members, we're strengthening our strategy and sticking to our fiscal goals. A net reduction of 80.6 billion in non-interest expenditure is being implemented over the medium term. At the same time, revenue has been revised up by 45.6 billion over the medium term relative to the medium-term budget policy statement. And we have taken the decision to introduce a reform of the gold and foreign exchange contingency reserve account, also known as GFECRA. Taken together, even with the spending increases I will announce later, the national government gross borrowing requirement will decline from 457.7 billion in 2024 to 428.5 billion in 26-27. The deficit will begin to improve from 24-24 to an estimated 4.5% of GDP, reaching 3.3% by 26-27. Debt will now peak at 75.3% of GDP in 25-26. All of this puts us in a position to continue to protect core services. It allows 60% of non-interest spending to be directed to the social wage. It allows us to preserve capital spending. Compared to the medium-term budget policy statement, we are adding 57.6 billion to pay for the salaries of teachers, nurses, doctors, among many other critical services. Madam Speaker, as I mentioned earlier, in this budget, we're announcing a reform of the GFECRA. GFECRA is an account held at the Reserve Bank that captures gains and losses on the country's foreign currency reserve transactions. Simply put, if the rand strengthens against the US dollar and other reserve currencies, the account balance declines, and vice versa. The account balance has grown to over 500 billion over the years because the rand has depreciated over time. A new settlement arrangement is being introduced that will reduce government borrowing and improve the Reserve Bank's equity position. Ultimately, we are bringing South Africa closer to our peers and ensuring alignment to international best practices. We will draw down 150 billion rand of the GFECRA balance once we've ensured that the sufficient buffers are available to absorb exchange rate swings and the solvency of the Reserve Bank is not compromised. We have embarked on a broad structural reform agenda that aims to address the challenges that held back our growth. This agenda included areas like electricity, logistics, water, telecommunication, and visa reforms. The budget review details the good progress that has been made in these areas over the past few years, but obstacles remain. And let me focus on the two largest of these. Load shedding is a problem that confronts all South Africans. It disrupts production, operations, livelihoods. Reforming the sector will result in long-term energy security. We took the necessary decision in the past 5 years, and these are beginning to are bearing fruit. To promote further investment in renewables, this budget proposes an increase in the limit for renewable energy projects that can qualify for carbon offset regime from 50 megawatts to 30 megawatts. Eskom continues to be a key role player in the electricity sector, and the debt relief plan allows the entity to focus on its core business. We will release the report on the independent review of Eskom's coal-fired power stations in the coming week. The review was done to inform part of the conditions attached to the debt relief plan. The recommendations will fit into Eskom's corporate plans to bolster accountability and oversight. It is true the combination of private investment in new energy projects, rooftop solar installations, and improvements in Eskom generation fleet that load shedding will reduce, and reliability and security of supply improve. In addition, to support these efforts, we're introducing a new 2 billion conditional grant over the medium term to fund the rollout of smart prepaid meters. This will begin with the municipalities that have been approved for debt relief. To address South Africa's increasingly unreliable logistics system, Cabinet approved the Freight Logistic Roadmap in December 2023. The roadmap outlines immediate steps needed to improve port equipment, locomotive availability, and network security. It also sets out a clear path for enhancing efficiencies, facilitating the introduction of competition, and leveraging financial and technical support of the private sector. In this regard, third-party access to the freight rail network will be introduced by May 2024. In ports, private partner has been secured to upgrade Pier 2 of the Durban Container Terminal. This should increase private investment in equipment, enhance technological capability, and improve operational efficiencies. Government has provided Transnet with a 47 billion guarantee facility to support the entity's recovery plan and meet its immediate debt obligation. Like Eskom, the guarantees come with conditions. These conditions require Transnet to focus on its core activities and for the entity to introduce private sector partnerships. This will improve Transnet's sustainability and support the implementation of the roadmap. Madam Speaker, I'm proud to announce that as part of this budget, we're introducing fundamental and far-reaching reforms to infrastructure financing and delivery. The reforms are to optimize the infrastructure value chain to be effective and efficient. In this way, we will strengthen the public investment management and the associated value chain. We will also attract private sector participation. In this regard, we gazetted amendments to the PPP regulatory framework on for public comments early this week, Minister Kubai. These amendments seek to reduce procedural complexity undertaking triple Ps, creating capacity to support and manage triple Ps, formulate clear rules for managing unsolicited bids, and strengthen the governance of fiscal risk. We are reviewing institutional arrangements and governance for catalytic infrastructure. The intention is to create clearer mechanisms for accountability, cooperation, and coordination. We're also consolidating similar functions to reduce duplication and inefficiencies. The intention is to fast-track delivery, particularly of blended finance arrangements. We are introducing several financing instruments, such as infrastructure bonds and concessional loans. As part of this, a flow-through tax vehicle for specific infrastructure projects similar to trust and other investment vehicles is being considered. A new funding window for proposal under the new dispensation of financing instruments will be open to the public, institutions shortly. What does that mean? Those who know BFI, it's a new window of BFI. Through these reforms, greater efficiency gains and infrastructure delivery will be fast-tracked. This will benefit network sectors, social infrastructure, triple Ps, and blended finance projects. Madam Speaker, the National Treasury plays a crucial role in mobilizing resources, designing incentives, and influencing policy to mainstream climate change. As climate-related disasters intensify and multi-layer risk-based approach is being developed to manage the associated fiscal risk. This considers various funding instruments from grants to contingency funds, including climate change response fund, depending on the incidence and intensity of the disaster event. The National Treasury is reviewing disaster response grants to improve efficiency and create incentives for disaster planning, preparedness, and risk reduction. It is also developing a climate budget tracking framework to influence policy, planning, and budget decisions by tracking climate-related expenditure in public budgets. The support of concessional funding providers such as multilateral development banks is going a long way to support our climate adaptation, mitigation, and energy transition, and sustainability initiatives. Crowding in the private sector is necessary to manage the climate disaster funds. The government has raised $3.3 billion so far from multilateral development banks and international finance institutions to support climate change, energy, and just transition objectives. We are actively participating in climate negotiations, aligning with government advocacy for reforming multilateral finance institutions. We're also working with the 8 municipalities to adapt and mitigate the effects of climate weather-related events by providing technical assistance for climate-responsive capital projects. The electric vehicle white paper outlines our strategy to transition towards a broader energy vehicle production and consumption in South Africa. Starting with electric vehicles, it aims to transition the automotive industry from primarily producing internal combustion engine vehicles to a dual platform that includes electric vehicles by 2035. To encourage the production of electric vehicles in South Africa, government will introduce an investment allowance for new investment beginning from the 1st of March 2026. This will allow producers to claim 150% of qualifying investment spending on electric and hydrogen-powered vehicles in the first year. The incentive will be implemented in addition to the existing support under the Automotive Production Development Program. Government has also reprioritized $964 million over the medium term to support transition to electric vehicles. Honorable members, the public procurement bill was expeditiously passed by the National Assembly. The amended bill has now been referred to the National Council of Provinces for concurrence. National Treasury is supporting provincial legislators as they process the bill and conduct nationwide public hearings. The bill provides for transformation measures that through set aside, pre-qualification, advancement of persons disadvantaged by unfair discrimination. These measures will be applicable to specified categories of persons, including small enterprise owned by Black people, Black women, Black youth, Black people with disabilities, and enterprises with particular geographic area, including enforcement of transformation through the BBBE level status. The bill also makes provision for local industrialization through designation and measures for sustainable development, labor absorption, and enterprise development, among others. We're well aware that currently procurement processes often fall short of delivering the cost-effective solution to government's needs. Too often, there's a substantial disparity between the prices government is being charged and the prevailing market price. For instance, I'm told the government buys ICT hardware such as laptops, uninterrupted power supply devices, monitors, and toners at between 1.5 and 1.2 or 2 times more than market price. Given that government buys in large quantities, we should in fact be paying less and leveraging our buying power to get more value for our money. Obtaining value for money as the principle of efficiency, transparency, and competition remain paramount. And we want to assure South Africans that these principles are not incompatible with transformation. Honorable members, the weak performance of our economy has resulted in sharp deterioration in tax revenue collection for 23-24. Yaqala indaba ndiza kule ndawo enzima ye-tax. At 1.73 trillion, tax revenue for 23-24 is 56.1 billion lower than estimated in the 2023 budget. The shortfall is largely due to the decline in corporate profits and revenue for taxes on mining. Over the medium term, revenue projections are 45.6 billion higher than the 2023 medium-term budget policy estimates, which increased personal income tax and additional medium-term revenue proposals. This budget contains tax measures that will raise 15 billion in 2024-25 to alleviate immediate fiscal pressures and support faster debt stabilization. Revenue is mostly raised through personal income tax, but not adjusting tax brackets, rebates, and medical tax credits for inflation. For alcohol products, excise duties above inflation increases of between 6.7 and 7.27% for 24-25 are proposed. This means a can of beer increases by 14 cents. A can of cider and alcohol fruit beverage goes by 14 cents. A bottle of wine costs an extra 28 cents. Mthembu say safe. A bottle of fortified wine will cost an extra 47 cents. A bottle of sparkling wine will cost an extra 89 cents. Wait, a bottle of spirits, including whiskey, bafowethu, gin and vodka increases by 5.53, R5.53. Salimbangala mato. We're also proposing into no sbeto BE apho basinganqa. Ku whiskey nezinto shayo BE uba ulapho ke na ulimele mfowethu. We're also proposing increased tobacco excise duty by 4.7% for cigarettes and cigarettes tobacco, and by 82% for pipe tobacco. This translates into R9.51 increase for cigars. Ngabona ke Chubana nalimala. 97 cents increase to a pack of cigarette, and an extra 57 cents for a pipe of tobacco. Hamkhelo Mukhane from Soweto, one of the over 2,700 South Africans who sent budget tips to the minister, has a suggestion I would like to share. Kamo says, I quote, I would suggest an introduction of a tax payment for hubbly bubbly as a cigarette and other alternatives. The country has seen an increase in a number of youth smoking these products, and parents are not pleased with this at all. Close quote. I would like to say to Kamo, as a parent myself, I agree with you. I'm certain the Minister of Health also agrees. You'll be happy to hear that we are tabling an increase of the excise duty on electronic nicotine and non-nicotine delivery systems known as vapes to R3.04 per milliliter. On environmental taxes, the carbon tax increased from 159 to 190 rand per ton of carbon dioxide equivalent from the 1st of January 2024. The carbon fuel levy will increase, not the fuel levy, the carbon fuel levy will increase to 11 cents per litre of petrol and 14 cents per litre for diesel, effective from the 3rd of April. A discussion paper outlining proposal for the second phase of the carbon tax will be published for public comment later in the year. Madam Speaker, we are mindful of the already high cost of living, the impact fuel prices have on the food and transport costs. In this regard, we are proposing no increases to the general fuel levy for 24-25. This will result in a tax release of around 4 billion. This is money back in the pockets of consumers. Madam Speaker, progress has been made on the two-pot retirement system since I last addressed you during the medium-term budget policy system. Contribution to retirement funds will be split, with 1/3 going into a savings component, 2/3 going into a retirement component. Now, ndifuna ukuzicacisa le nto ke bantakwethu. Ndifuna ukucacisa le nto. Abantu bandistopa bonke esitratweni bandibuza uba iphuma nini imali yethu. Nibaxelele ke ngomalungu eParliament xa nigoduka ukuba from i-1st kaSeptember bonke bazayifumana le mali. From i-1st kaSeptember laa mali yepension iyafumaneka. Nam funeka bayeke undiphazamisa endleleni. Ndinomnye udadewethu phaa oyitishala unozicela usafuna ngokuba ndiyazi noyazi uba imali yena azayifumana ndizayazela phi ngoba kaloku uyawuyazi ngepension yakhe. So from the 1st of September 2015, silwile nojonga le. We must commend on Honorable Maswangane. He has been vociferous in making sure that this bill passes. And we even fought on the timelines. It was difficult to persuade him because the industry was not ready. He wanted to be effective from the 1st of April, but the industry was not ready, but he allowed us to postpone it to the 1st of September. Thank you, Comrade Maswangane. So, the two-pot system ensures that we strike a balance between preserving contributions to safeguard a better retirement for members while addressing the plight of the people to access some of their retirement funds to help ease their financial burden in times of distress. Over the next few years, we're also implementing a global minimum corporate tax to limit the negative effects of tax competition. Multinational corporations with an annual revenue exceeding 750 million euros will be subject to an effective tax rate of at least 15%, regardless of where their profits are generated. This is a global tax. That's why even the benchmark is euros. is an agreement in the OECD. So we're beginning to implement that. So irrespective of where your profits are generated, that. The proposed reform is expected to yield an additional 8 billion in corporate tax revenue in 26-27. I encourage interested parties to provide comments on the draft global minimum tax bill published today. Our long-term tax policy strategies remain focused on broadening the tax base while improving tax compliance and administrative efficiency. Visible progress has been made in rebuilding and modernizing SARS. The tax authority has expanded the tax register, improved debt collections, and reduced fraudulent refunds and trade evaluation. This has led to improvements in revenue collection. To address the higher levels of illicit tobacco, SARS is deploying CCTV and related technologies at licensed tobacco manufacturers. Investigations and prosecutions have resulted in 10 billion in additional assessment, of which over 4 billion has been collected from the key players in the illicit gold and tobacco industry. These and other efforts have assisted with the improvement in revenue. Our bigger challenge, as I've stated earlier, is that our pie is not growing fast enough, and this limits our ability to generate sufficient revenues to distribute among our priority areas. Madam Speaker, at the time of the 2023 medium-term budget policy statement, when revenue collection had performed much worse than anticipated, departments had to reprioritize spending and absorb the wage increases within their baseline. These measures were taken to protect our fiscal integrity. Equally, critical programs had to be protected. This is a practical expression of fiscal consolidation that supports delivery of core services and the social wage. Since then, we have been able to reverse some of the fiscal consolidation announced at the time of the medium-term budget policy statement. In this budget, I'm able to announce that the education sector is allocated an additional 25.7 billion for the carry-through cost of the wage increase over the medium term. At the same time, we're able to protect the budget of critical programs such as school nutrition programs, the program that provides food to pupils in almost 20,000 schools. The Early Childhood Development Grant is allocated a 1.6 billion, raising to 2 billion over the medium term. Health is allocated a total of 854 billion over the medium term. These allocations include 11.6 billion to address the 2023 wage agreement, 27 billion for infrastructure, 1.4 billion for the NHI grant over the same period. The allocation for the NHI is a demonstration of the government's commitment to this policy. There remain a range of system strengthening activities that are key enablers of an improved public healthcare system that must be undertaken. Such activities include building a national health information system and digital patients' records, upgrading health facilities and improving the quality of care to ensure that they meet the minimum criteria to be certified as accredited for contracting under NHI. Strengthening facilities and district management in preparation for contracting. Granting semi-autonomous status for central and potential other hospitals, and developing reference prices and provider payment methods for hospitals. Many of these activities are already underway, but require further development before the NHI can be rolled out at scale. Madam Speaker, there's also been significant progress in improving access to public transport services for low-income commuters. The Rail Recovery Program of the Passenger Rail Agency of South Africa is continuing with 27 corridors reopened by December 2023. This will increase the number of passengers on metro rail from 15.6 million in 2022-23 to an estimated 48.6 million by 26-27. To ensure the effective discharge of office duties during elections and its other responsibility beyond the polls, the Independent Electoral Commission is allocated 2.3 billion. The police and the defense purely for the elections. The police and the defense purely for the elections are allocated an additional 350 million to support the elections. A further 200 million will be allocated for political party funding as political parties prepare for the general elections. Government also supports resettled farmers through land redistribution and tenure reform programs, which have been allocated 6 billion over the medium term. To keep pace with inflation and increase access, permanent social grants are increased. Let me just pause and say, walking stick. Uthi wena kakuhlukane nosinyusela nge-20 rand. So I want to assure Lagogo ukuthi mna di-generous anzomnyusela nge-20 rand. We are giving them an increase of 100 rand to the old age grant. Water veteran, disability care and grants. This will be split in 90 rand effective from April and 10 effective from October. 50 rand increase for the foster care and 20 rand increase to the child support grant.
Order.
We are
Order,
sensitive to the
Order.
increase in the cost of living for nearly 19 million South Africans who are really rely on these grants to make ends meet. In this regard, we have done as much as the fiscal envelope allows. Work is currently underway to improve the COVID-19 social relief of distress grant. By April the 1st, like all other grants, these grants are starting on the 1st of April. As the President has said, that is going to be improved. Work is being done. The Minister of Social Development is publishing regulations. When we finally gazette those resolutions, the new grant and the figure will be published together with those regulations. These improvements will be within the fiscal framework. For the extension of the grant beyond 2025, we have made the point that it may have to find some revenue source for it. PAC. We have also made provision for key initiatives aimed at job creation. 61.4 billion is allocated for employment program over the medium term. 7.4 billion has been identified for the Presidential Employment Initiative. Government is also prioritizing fighting crime and corruption with a focus on enhancing law enforcement agency. Mamela, I was in that going on. If facts is on the table, we're doing the work. We're doing the work. As more, shall deliver. A total of 765 billion rand is allocated to peace and security cluster. In the coming financial year, 10,000 new police recruits will be trained. And as part of the country's responsibility to promote regional peace and stability, this budget will also allocate funding for the deployment of soldiers in Mozambique and DRC. Work on costing and identifying these needs for these critical missions will continue throughout the year, and funding will be allocated as such. 628 million has been allocated to the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development for the implementation of FATF and State Capture Commission recommendations, bringing the total funding to these efforts to 2.3 billion. Government is using 2.9 billion from the criminal asset recovery account to combat illegal mining and other priority crimes, with a 60% allocated, in fact 1.7 billion allocated for the deployment of the police, including vehicle procurement. This budget is also prioritizing infrastructure provision. Government plans to invest more than 943 billion rand in public infrastructure. Spending will support refurbishment and maintenance of existing assets and building of new infrastructure. Madam Speaker, 2.8 trillion, or put it differently, 5.1% of non-interest expenditure is allocated to provinces and municipalities over the next 3 years. 5.7 billion is allocated to local government, and 2.2 trillion. Additional 105 billion is allocated to provinces for the next 3 years to cover the cost of implementing 2023 public service wage agreement, mainly in education and health sector. Provision of these additional funds will cushion the wage bill pressure faced by these critical personnel-intensive departments, while freeing up resources for capital investment in goods and services. Moreover, reductions that were previously made on some of the grants have been reversed. Restoring baseline of these grants will help maintain important service for the most vulnerable and provide for critical capital investment. However, to ensure public finances remain sustainable, the reductions are maintained to several other grants baseline, although many continue to grow over the next 3 years, despite the reductions. Regarding municipalities, an additional 1.4 billion is provided for municipal disaster recovery grant to fund the repair and reconstruction of infrastructure damage by the tragic floods of 2023. Madam Speaker, municipalities are the cold face of service delivery. Sadly, an unacceptable number of them are experiencing weaknesses in governance, financial management, and service delivery. To address these challenges and to transform municipalities into engines of growth, we have adopted a multi-pronged approach. It focuses on tightening budget processes, ramping up oversight, increasing the skills and capacity of municipal employees, and driving investment in maintaining and building infrastructure. Madam Speaker, this year the country hosts the annual meetings of the new development bank, which will happen for the second time since formation of the BRICS Bank. In 2025, South Africa takes on the presidency of the G20, following that of Brazil and India. Before that, South Africa's G20 president is an opportunity for us to advance the most pressing economic and developmental and financial issues that face poor and developing countries. As President Ramaphosa rightly stated in his State of the Nation address, our goal is to place Africa's development at the top of the agenda when we host the G20 in 25. We are working on the necessary allocations and identification of funds to make sure that the various events are a success. As we have shown recently, South Africa remains an important regional and international leader. Through participation and advocacy on platforms such as G20, we can push for substantive reform of multinational institutions like the World Bank and IMF, so that developing countries participate more equally in the decision-making process and global governance. Moral courage and know-how are not in short supply in our country. We should harness these gifts not only to better ourselves and our economy, but for the benefit of the entire continent. Madam Speaker, we've come a long way in the last 30 years. 30 years ahead of us, and whatever the challenges and opportunities they may bring are something we should look forward to. Given our difficult past and some of the inevitable challenges we have faced as a young democracy trying to find its place in a world marked by a number of new and overlapping crises, it would be easy to indulge in extremes, either of blind optimism or crippling pessimism. We should resist both these extremes. Rather, we should heed the words of our first democratic President Nelson Mandela, who more than saw the pursuit of socio-economic justice and shared prosperity as a journey rather than a destination. allow me to repeat what the President said in his closing remarks. I have walked that long road to freedom. I have tried not to falter. I've made missteps along the way, but I have discovered the secret that after climbing a great hill, the only finds that there are many more hills to climb. I've taken a moment to rest and to steal a view of the glorious vista that surrounds me. To look back to the distance I have come, but I can only rest for a moment, for with freedom come responsibility. I dare not linger, for my long walk is not ended. Indolently. Madam Speaker, as I conclude, I want to remind South Africans that the message they should take away from this budget. Government is making the most out of its way with limited resources. We continue to support economic growth, reduce growth of government debt and the cost of debt, allocate more funds for core services, and provide the social wage. I'm grateful to the President and Deputy President for their continued support and leadership. Lo support yenu bifuneka nya. Thank you to the Deputy Minister of Finance, Dr. Masondo, and the excellent National Treasury team led by Director General Dr. Duncan Peterson, the majority of whom, Mr. President, are Tinswalos. Thank you to the Commissioner of the South African Revenue Services and the Governor of the South African Reserve Bank. Thank you to my colleagues, the ministers in the committee of the MINCOM Board and in the Budget Council who shared the heavy load of the tough decision that may mean to sustain the public finances. To Parliamentary Command, my chairperson, Honorable Maswanganye, Honorable Telezi, of course, and to my wife and family, your love, support, and forbearance are daily inspiration. Lastly, thank you to you, each and every one of South Africans, and those who have been sending messages encouraging. I
thank the Honorable the Minister of Finance. Order. The papers tabled by the Minister will be referred to the relevant committees. Honorable members, I will now suspend proceedings until 3:20. I thank the honorable members. The House is adjourned.
Well, there you have it, South Africa. The Minister of Finance, Mr. Enoch Godongwana, has just delivered the last budget speech of the 6th dispensation. And this is a budget speech that many academics and thought leaders out there have referred to as a legacy budget speech. And of course, as we know, the budget speech in this process, the minister has tabled a number of key documents before the National Assembly. Number one, of course, is the 2024 Division of Revenue Bill. The second one is the 2024 Appropriation Bill. The third one is estimates of national expenditure. The fourth one there is the 2024 budget review, and the next one is the fiscal framework, and the next one is the second adjustment appropriation bill. And of course, as we know, these are all of the key documents that must be taken into consideration by the National Assembly in terms of just ensuring that allocations, as allocations are being made, that all the key considerations are actually taken into account. But one of the key things that we can pick up from the minister's speech is the fact that he reiterated that government is continuing to embark on a broad structural reform agenda, and that, of course, includes issues such as areas such as electricity. We know how access to electricity or stability within the energy sector has, of course, affected the economy. So, of course, that is an area of a key focus area for government as it stands. The next one, of course, is logistics. The next one is water, and another area is telecommunications and visa reforms. And those are the specifics that the minister has outlined in his speech. We are, of course, standing by for Tsepo, who's outside, who's just getting some reactions from members of parliament about what their thoughts are about the minister's speech. And over to you, Tsepo.
We are live outside the Cape Town City Hall, where the Minister of Finance has just delivered his budget speech, the last budget speech of the 6th administration, that is. And there are a lot of things that the minister mentioned. However, we are outside just to get some reactions from the members of parliament. And with me, I am joined by the leader of the NFP, Mr. Sheikh Imam. Sir, what are some of the reactions do you have on the last budget speech of the 6th administration?
Well, I must be honest, not impressive at all. First of all, there's a lot of emphasis on infrastructure. And you can see over the medium term, we're talking about over 900 somewhat billion. And we know and understand we don't have the capacity to be able to implement it. We've had this time and time again. Year in and year out, we talk about these things. Now, a very important point that the minister is not taking into consideration is the large sums of money equivalent to 40% on goods and services, which includes in infrastructure, that is lost to the economy every year because you don't get value for money. Now, the public procurement bill that we have now initiated, rightfully so, does not go far enough in addressing those concerns and challenges we have, which means this country is losing something like about 400 billion rand a year because you're not getting value for money. Now, we know with those infrastructure programs, many of them have either not been completed or large sums of money are being embezzled. We know that we have the construction mafia that are holding them hostage as far as that is concerned. We know they are being given out to organizations or companies who either don't qualify or do not have the capacity to be able to implement these things. Now let's look at the issue of the amount of money that is being directed to the safety and security cluster. Now, why not address what are the root causes of the high levels of crime and things in the country and the safety and security of our citizens, rather than recruiting more and more police officers? Should we not be ensuring that our police officers are better equipped, better paid, have decent danger allowances and things, are protected, and more importantly, deal with the socio-economic conditions under which our people are living? So you can bring in more and more police officers is not going to solve the problem. Now we talk about education, and he has allocated an X amount of money towards education. But again, what we're not addressing is the need to improve the quality of education in the country, which is resulting in many of whom, 60% of these that go to TVET colleges, drop out in the first year. Now, if you remember what the president said, he talked about easing visa regulations in order to have access to skills from internationally. But what about our skills? Because of what is happening with the limited economic growth, and you can see it's only 0.6%, it simply means more and more of our skills are going to leave the country. We welcome, however, the money that's allocated for the NHI, because the NHI can never be a success without large sums of money being made available. And more importantly, this might help us to protect and sustain those medical practitioners that have qualified, served the community service, and are not employed at the moment, and there are over 1,000 of them.
Now, the minister mentioned that their mission for the past 30 years has been to restore the economic and social justice of this country. Do you think they have achieved that?
South Africa remains one of the most unequal societies in the world. Inequality is greater today than it ever been. More people are going hungry to bed. More people are dying of starvation. So I don't think it has been addressed. I can tell you what it has achieved, though. 17,500 black millionaires and multimillionaires have been created over the last couple of years, and the question is, what have they put back into the economy? How much has it, enhanced the lives of the poorest of the poor and the most vulnerable? It certainly hasn't. We need to go back to the drawing board and look at the policies that we've put in place, whether it's working for the country or not. If it's not, we should be changing direction.
And then the minister did point out a few challenges. Apart from all the achievements that they've come with so far in the past 30 years, he mentioned the challenges such as load shedding, which affects production, affects livelihoods, SMMEs, entrepreneurship opportunities. Do you think that there is enough being done in terms of consequence management and ensuring that the people that are involved in this maladministration come to book?
Well, first of all, I think it brought a smile on my face when the minister spoke about electric cars. I was trying to picture the scenario with all these electric cars parked on the freeways because there's no electricity. So it's good to dream. There's nothing wrong about that. And it's also good to have a progressive mind. But I think the most important thing is there has not been consequences. If you look at the amount of money, even he's setting aside for that security cluster, how many people have been imprisoned in terms of the 1 billion rand we spent on the state capture commission? So there is no consequences. In fact, it's not part of our vocabulary. If you look at the latest 5.19 billion rand lost in local municipality, and that's only 170 of the 257 municipalities that they have audited. So these are some of the problems, and how many of people have accounted for it? Hardly anybody, and nothing is going to happen about it. It's going to be on business as usual.
Thank you so much for that. That was Honorable Sheikh Imam, and here I am with Honorable Swartz. Thank you so much for giving us this review. So the minister has just announced his budget speech for 2024. It's the last one of the administration. What are your thoughts on all of this?
Well, we've always been relatively optimistic, but this time we are deeply concerned at the escalating debt, escalating budget deficit. We see the debt service costs are 356 billion rand per year. That crowds out expenditure on education, on health, on crime fighting. And now, because we're in this financial situation, this financial crisis, what the minister is now forced to do, which we don't support, is to go to the reserves, our foreign exchange reserves at the Reserve Bank, and take 150 billion rand there. Now, those reserves are there for the 2008 financial crisis. They're there to buttress your country when there's capital outflows. They're there to ensure your bank is properly solvent. And now that 150 billion rand is coming across to National Treasury. And how's it going to be spent? And next year again, when we've got the same situation, are we then going to empty the account totally, setting a very, very dangerous precedent which we don't support? On the positive side, one sees that personal income taxes have not been increased directly, although what we do see is bracket creep is there, so we are going to pay more. Fuel price has not increased, although there is another levy coming in there on carbon tax. So all these things put together, I'm afraid this does not get the ACDP support because of the economic policies that have resulted in low economic growth. But thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you so much. And we are still live outside the City Hall, and now I am joined by Honorable Kwankwa. Honorable Kwankwa, the budget speech has been delivered. There are a lot of things that the minister highlighted, flagged a lot of things that also are challenges to this economy and the sixth administration as a whole. What do you think of the budget speech 2024?
Well, it was an elections budget. It's a pity that the government is broke, so they couldn't dole out monies and be handing out gifts and coming out with all sorts of nonsense. The fact that they decided, for instance, against increasing value-added tax when they have a serious problem, for example, financially revenue shortfalls, points to a direction where they didn't want to actually upset the public, especially the middle class, the working class. The other issue is the reason why they didn't increase the fuel levy. Under normal circumstances, they would have increased it. It's for the same reason. The reason why they've decided to increase social grants by 100 rands is simply because they are trying to say to people, if you vote for us, we are going to reward you. Guess what? We are going to give you one tranche of the increase now. The next one will come in October. So if you vote for us, we'll actually make sure that in October you're rewarded handsomely. That's what they are saying. But insofar as the management of the country's finances, it's a very bleak picture. The country is broke. We're not even able to generate enough revenue. Why? Because the policies of the ANC are not such that they're able to grow the South African economy. They actually strangle it, if you like, because they talk left and then walk right, which is actually the problem, which confuses the markets. We are still doling out guarantees of 47 billion rands, if you look at it, to Transnet, after all the inefficiencies and the problems that SOEs have given us. And we always lie to the public and say we're going to make sure that there are strict conditions, but we give them guarantees. The conditions are always in place, but the money goes where? Into other people's comrades' pockets and not where it's supposed to go.
Now, talking about SOEs, I just asked one of the members here that do you think there is enough accountability and consequence management that is being implemented to ensure that SOEs come to a position where they are more sustainable and those that are the culprits are put to book?
No. There's no accountability, because if there was proper consequence management in the system, you'd hear of some of the DGs and members of the executives of SOEs who have been arrested, say, for an example, in instances where monies have been stolen. You'd hear of people being fired, for example, for mismanagement of the SOEs. But the problem really is because they deploy cadres and not people who are fit for purpose. So it doesn't matter what people do. They do so with complete impunity because they've got the support of the governing party. And it's no longer about the voters and the people that we're supposed to be serving. It's about them protecting their own interests when they go into SOEs. Some of the SOEs in the past, SABC, as a parastatal, retrenched many people. And guess what? When an audit was done, it was discovered that some of the people who were working there did not even have journalism experience or know nothing about journalism, but some of them were in managerial positions. Why? Because they were in the struggle somewhere.
Thank you so much for those reactions. So a lot of reaction with regards to the misappropriation of funds and a lot of reactions with regards to the debt that this country has been in. A lot of the issues, and I think this is something that goes even as far as there's the MTBPS that was given just last year. Members have been complaining about the debt that the country has and has been faced with. And even today, the minister has been talking about the deficit that this country has seen, especially in terms of the tax revenue that the country has managed to come with. And now I am joined by the leader of the ATN, Mr. Viola Zungula. Thank you so much for joining me. The minister has spoken. This is the last budget speech for 2024, the sixth administration at least. What are your thoughts on some of the things that the minister touched on?
You know what the budget speech did is almost the same as what the SONA did, which is to use it for campaigning purposes. But it is not sustainable in the sense that you've got a PIC that has got over 2.6 trillion rands that is available per annum towards its initiatives. But you find that there is no real drive from Treasury to influence PIC towards programs that are production in nature, programs that will make the economy to be stimulated towards growth. Because out of that 2.6 trillion, majority of that money goes towards, number one, big companies that are listed on the JSC, and secondly, programs that are consumer based in the sense that it is not programs that are, for example, manufacturing, the building of factories. Again, there's the issue of the lack of tax revenue. We're of the view that there's a missed opportunity in the informal sector because the industry, it has got more than 500 billion per annum, and this industry is dominated by people that are coming from other countries, coming to the country, making use of the infrastructure and public services, but they contribute nothing in terms of taxes. So we view that as a missed opportunity.
From what you have outlined right now, I think the biggest problem is the lack of opportunities for entrepreneurs. And looking at the situation, I mean, the minister even mentioned that load shedding is a problem. Do you think that enough is being done to ensure that opportunities such as entrepreneurial opportunities and opportunities for SMMEs to thrive in this economy are being made by government?
Not at all, because we're of the view as a party that any talk about prioritizing SMMEs must be backed up by legislation, because currently the government spends more than 80% of its budget on big business, and SMMEs and cooperatives are only scrambling for less than 20%. If there was any drive on prioritizing SMMEs, it needs to be legislated in the sense that a certain percentage of all government departments, entities must go towards small businesses. But we can't have a government that is just going to speak but not have legislation to back up their political ideas.
Now, the minister also mentioned the procurement of electrical vehicles, talked about ensuring that there is support and that there is funding for such and the infrastructure thereof. Looking at load shedding, do you think it's a bit of a dream that the government is telling to the nation?
Yeah, it's definitely a dream, because there's nowhere in one line you are going to have electric cars and encourage the procuring of electric cars once you've got a bigger problem of load shedding, because majority now of the middle class are trying to buy inverters because they are trying to deal with load shedding. What should they do now in the case of their cars not being able to have being charged for them to be able to operate? So it's there's a conflict, there's a contrast in what the minister said versus what the reality is.
Then the last point. So the minister, they've increased by 100 Rand some of the pension monies, 100 Rand for the old ages, 50 Rand for foster care and so on. Do you think this is sustainable, especially in the economy that we're in at the moment?
It's definitely not sustainable. Whilst we do understand that people, the grant system is assisting in terms of poverty reduction, but the drive should be towards creating jobs and business opportunities so that people are able to live dignified lives on their own. Grants must only be there for people who cannot survive on their own. So the fact that we're going to have a government that is so proud in increasing the people that are dependent on grants, it means we don't have a government that is serious about job creation.
Thank you so much for that. So many reactions, and now I am joined by Dr. Dion George, who is the DA Shadow Minister. Thank you so much for joining us today. The Minister has spoken. What are your thoughts?
Well, as expected, it was a bailout budget for the ANC. The minister is now going to take 150 billion rand out of the contingency reserve of the Reserve Bank and basically throw it into a massive pit of debt, basically, and it's not going to make any difference whatsoever. What the minister needed to do was to make structural reforms. So, for example, cut back on the public sector wage bill and also not continue to bail out the state-owned enterprises. Although there is no direct bailouts, we still have the transfer of the debt onto the national balance sheet, which means that this is not going to sort out any problem with the debt at all. But most importantly, he completely ignored vulnerable South Africans. There are 5 million starving children in South Africa, according to the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund. He did not increase the child grant, which he could have done, although the social relief of distress grant will remain for another year. What happens after that, we don't know. And also what he could have done is he could have cut back on tax. For example, he could have cut the fuel tax, which would have made transportation less expensive and reduced the price of food. He could have expanded the zero VAT-rated food basket, but he did not do that. And in fact, he implemented a stealth tax, because by not adjusting the brackets for inflation, for tax, people's salaries have gone up because of inflation, but of course the tax bracket's not adjusted, so they're actually paying more tax. So it was, on the whole, a very disappointing budget from a government that simply doesn't care about battling South African households.
Thank you so much for that. Well, that was all those reactions that we could get from the 2024 budget outside the City Hall in Cape Town. Let's head back to the studio. I am Tsepo Mori signing back. Thank you.
That was Tsepo there outside the Cape Town City Hall, getting some reactions from members of Parliament based on what their party political views are about the speech that has just been delivered by the Minister of Finance. And of course, just coming back to some of the key points that have been made, Honourable Sheikh Imam there talking about the public procurement bill, talking to issues of value for money, the fact that this bill, in his view, does not address some of the key issues, because he he says that there's a lot of fiscal leakage that we see due to the fact that there's so many projects that are not completed. And of course, we can tie that in again to issues of state capability and continuing, and the state being on this drive to ensure that it continues to strengthen capability, not only at the national sphere, but across the three spheres of government. But of course, he also raises a very important issue, and this is a crime-related issue, and that is the issue of the challenge of the construction mafia. And that's one of the main reasons why projects are unable to be completed, because of the construction mafia. They interfere. If they are unable to get business deals with regards to that, they obstruct the process of completing projects. And of course, he also speaks to addressing the root causes of crime. People are obviously saying that the country is under siege, particularly in crime hotspots. We've seen a lot the issue of Diepsloot, for example, where the residents of Diepsloot have been talking about the fact that crime levels are so high, people are under siege there. But we also know that the president in his speech spoke to the project Chanela, and that is a project within the security cluster, within the policing system, to ensure that they address escalating crime levels, particularly at crime hotspots. But of course, Honorable Sheikh Imam, they're saying that it is, as much as we are allocating money towards addressing the symptoms of the manifestation of crime across the broader across the society, we must also think about what are the root causes of crime, and then channel resources towards addressing the root causes of crime, so that we don't just deal with the manifestation of crime, but then we actually are fixing the social fabric, the social and the moral fabric of our society. He also spoke about, of course, the issue of skills leaving the country, and that he raised within the context of the doctors. There's more than 1,000 doctors that we know about who are currently not in employment, and if those doctors are not placed within the short to medium, within the near future, these are the kind of skills that the country will continue to lose if doctors who are qualified are unable, and not only doctors, and we're talking about people across the board, who have the necessary skill to build, to be part and parcel of building this democratic project of ours, then they will also leave the country. We also had some commentary from Honorable Swartz of the ACDP, who was talking about the fact that the minister was talking about an undertaking to take 150 billion from the Reserve Bank, and that is for servicing the debt that we have. And of course, he's not the only one who raised issues about that. And of course, this is about ensuring that the economy has to grow in the long term, to ensure that, we don't continue borrowing and servicing debt and redirecting resources that is required for actually building the economy, and, for critical projects such as, our basic, social services, and access to key services, instead of servicing these debts. Honorable Kwankwa also made his inputs there, talking about the fact that, we have not been able to grow the economy, which is a fact, but of course, as we know, the minister also spoke about, the continuation of this focus on embarking on a broad structural reform agenda there, focusing on electricity, logistics, and of course, we know how important electricity is, electricity generation in terms of advancing the country's transformation agenda and growing the economy as well, logistics, water, telecommunications, as well as visa reforms as well. But of course, the minister also spoke to allocations around education, reiterating that the education sector is allocated an additional 25.7 billion rand for the carry-through cost of the wage increase over the medium term, which is very important. In terms of school nutrition, the minister also spoke there about school nutrition. We know that particularly for those schools where children come from poor families and they are unable, obviously, they come home without having eaten a meal. The school nutrition program is so critical for ensuring that children are able to go to school and be able to learn and be productive within that space. And they're indicating that the program provides food to pupils in almost 20,000 schools across the country. With regards to early childhood development, the minister also indicated there that there's an allocation of 1.6 billion rising to that amount has been taken from 1.6 billion, I beg your pardon, to 2 billion over the medium term. And of course, we know about the other allocations, the increments that have been made with the permanent social grants. The increments there, we're looking here at the increase of 100 Rand to the old age, the veterans, as well as the disability and care dependency grants. And of course, that is important, particularly given the current state of our economy, and that puts food on the table for many South Africans who are unable to look after themselves. With that said, it's also important for us to remember that this is an electioneering year. The sixth term literally has just come to an end, with obviously the president having delivered his final State of the Nation of the sixth dispensation, and of course the Minister of Finance delivering this final budget speech of the sixth dispensation. In a few weeks we will be going to the elections, where all of these parties will be contesting for more space. And of course Parliament continues to play its role in terms of ensuring that it creates a platform for all political parties that are represented in Parliament to make their voices heard in a transparent manner, in a manner that represents the constituencies, that where they come from. With that said, we want to thank you very much for making the time to be with us today as we build up from the morning, creating context around all of the key issues, critical issues that still require government's intervention. But not only government intervention, but it requires social compacting from across various sectors in the country in order to take the country forward. With that said, do stay tuned for more after this. The proceedings in the National Assembly are shortly to be resumed. And my name is, of course, Dr. Sibulelo Mbulani.